We're here for the Brattleboro Selectboard June 2, 2015 regularly scheduled meeting. Welcome to anybody who's watching us live on TV. Welcome to everybody who's in attendance. We want to welcome members of the press and our ASL interpreters. The first matter on tonight's we know that the meeting was officially warned because we convened the meeting at 5:30 and went into executive session to discuss contracts, labor relations matters, real estate options, and appointments, among other things. The first item, or the next item on the agenda, is to approve the minutes from May 12, May 19, and May 26. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the minutes from May 12, 19, and 26. Are there any comments from anybody who's in attendance, anybody on the board? Any proposed changes to those minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving those minutes from May 12, 19, and 26 as presented, please say aye. 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 Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. I will note that one of our board members, Donna Macomber, is not available tonight, so we're working with 4 board members. I also understand that we may lose one of our board members in 45 minutes approximately. Got to go home for because of a family illness. So we'll move through this first round of business as quickly as possible so we have as many people as can presenting. Listening. Chair's remarks is the next item on the agenda. I want to start by congratulating the planning department and the town as a whole for the EPA grant that was announced on Friday, I believe, as a result of real expertise and hard work in the planning department, and particularly I want to congratulate Mr. Francis and Sue Fillion, both of whom have worked long and hard in an effort to get this EPA grant. It's going to tremendously increase our capacity in terms of helping identify and plan for remediation of potentially hazardous situations in the downtown corridor and allow us to support economic development in the downtown area. When Rod comes up to speak about zoning related issues, we'll ask him to give a little bit more detail, but it's really, really good news, and we want to congratulate the planning department for all that hard work and on the capacity that's going to be built going forward. I also want to just note once again the scope of the work that's going on in the town as a whole. Our line striping program is pretty much been completed for the spring, although the state certainly has not come and done their line striping, which particularly leaves Putney Road and the bicycle lanes on Putney Road as a very, very dangerous situation. We encourage the state to come and do their line striping as soon as reasonably possible. The old stone retaining wall in the Harmony lot has been taken down and stabilized. The work is going on at the top of Union Hill, and that's really an example of the town responding to a public safety hazard. We had a death from a hit-and-run driver who never was located just about 2 years ago, and in direct response to that, we have rebuilt that intersection. It looks like we'll probably, Hannah, be getting ready to open that back up in a couple of weeks, maybe sooner, is what it looks like now. I saw the dirt started to go down today into what's going to be the grassed-in areas. So there's really a lot of activity going on in town, and we want to thank everybody who's contributing to that. And I also just want to note, this is the 6th week in a row that the Select Board has met So we've had 3 regular meetings and 3 special meetings. And although I think we won't meet next week, we're probably going to be meeting the week after for our regularly scheduled meeting, and we'll need to have another special meeting at the end of June. There's really been a very significant volume of business that we've been tackling, including studying the zoning ordinance that's been drafted, the new zoning ordinance. And we encourage everybody to watch those recordings on BCTV and to engage in our review of the zoning ordinance, because pretty soon, towards the end of the summer, it looks like we're going to have new zoning regulations here in town, and it's a culmination probably of 2 years' worth of work getting there. That's all of my comments. Town manager's comments.
I don't have anything this evening off of the, other than the agenda items. Thank you.
Select board comments, committee reports.
Strolling to the Heifers this weekend. That's all I got.
Anybody else? Public participation. Anybody who wants to speak to something that is not on the agenda.
If I said that.
Next on the agenda is water and sewer commissioners. We're ready for a motion to convene as water and sewer commissioners.
So moved.
We have motion to convene as water and sewer commissioners. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. The matter on the water and sewer commissioner agenda is purchasing a utility vehicle. Hi, Hannah.
Good evening. My name is Hannah O'Connell. I'm with the Brattleboro Department of Public Works. And this evening we are seeking approval to purchase a 2015 Chevrolet Sonic to replace our 2009 Chevy Aveo as part of the FY15 capital utilities budget in the amount of $15,981. In 2008, the Department of Public Works looked at some of our efficiencies and inefficiencies, and we felt like both the water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant could use a car to make their runs, to do sampling and other errands like that. It's proven to be a really successful program. They get much better gas mileage, and they're really low maintenance for just doing the little running around town.
Is the Sonic better than the Aveo?
The Sonic is the current Chevy replacement of the Aveo. They're not making the Aveo anymore. It's a comparable vehicle.
I understand that the authorization request includes trade-in value of the old vehicle.
That's correct. The trade-in value offered by Shearer Chevrolet of Burlington is $2,400.
We're getting this off the state of Vermont contract.
That's correct.
We've done a lot of business with Shearer, haven't we?
They do the most business with the state of Vermont, the contract or state bid service, however you want to call it.
At least it's in the state. I'm happy about that.
Any discussion or inquiry from anybody on the board?
So what happens with the remainder of the money? You know, that, because we author, I just wanted to point that out. We authorized 20,
Right. It,
came in at 15.
right, the budget included 20.
Right.
And you're actually authorizing the expenditure of the 15, and the balance of that just remains in the town's funds.
Okay.
Sometimes we're fortunate and achieve
I know.
a bid that's lower than
Yeah.
what was anticipated. Sometimes, of course, it turns out the other way. So the money is remaining unspent and available for a future purchase to be determined, subject to your authority.
Anything else from the board? Does anybody who's in attendance have any questions or comments about the potential purchase of the 2015 Chevrolet Sonic for use by the Public Works Department? Hearing none, we're ready for motion. We have a motion
Want
to,
me to read it?
yes, please.
Okay, to approve the purchase of a 2015 Chevrolet Sonic at a cost of $15,981 from Shearer Chevrolet of Burlington, Vermont.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of authorizing approval of the Chevy Sonic at $15,981 from Shearer Chevrolet, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell.
Hannah, can we plant tomatoes in those little things by the Union Hill?
No,
No, we're not blocking the view.
Tomatoes are small.
Anything further to come before the board as Water and Sewer Commissioners? We're ready to have a motion to adjourn as Water and Sewer Commissioners.
Sewer Commission.
Any discussion? All those in favor of adjourning as Water and Sewer Commissioners, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. Next matter on the agenda is the Vermont Yankee letter of agreement. And for an explanation of that agreement letter, I will call on Town Manager Peterello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to point out that the agreement that was published in the backup materials for this evening's meeting was actually a prior draft of the agreement and has been updated both to reflect the agreement of the parties as of Friday and also some additional tweaking that's occurred in the last couple of days. None of the changes are substantive in terms of how the agreement will operate and the services that will be provided by the town's fire department. They all relate to the insurance and provisions, the indemnification, the hold harmless, and legal language of the document. So unless the board would like me to go more explicitly through those changes, I would just summarize that the content of the agreement reflects the need that Vermont Yankee has for the town to come down to incidents that may occur there in the future with a ladder truck and fire personnel. It's services that we would have provided anyway through mutual aid agreements, but because of the special nature of the facility and the sort of dedicated commitment that the town is making, that these resources would be the ones that the Vermont Yankee facility can count on. There is an agreement that provides that the town will be paid in accordance with a schedule for such special services under Chapter 20 of the town's Code of Ordinances, and that the town's vehicle that is sent there, if it's ever damaged in a significant enough way or becomes contaminated at the site in a way that would make it not able to function for all its basic needs for our community and other mutual aid partners, then Entergy would replace the unit with a new one of all the same specifications and up-to-date model. And then there's language in the agreement that protects the parties from legal responsibility for each other's actions, basically. With that, staff recommends, and I'll also note that it's been approved by the town attorney and by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns attorneys representing the insurance program that provides the town's liability coverage. So staff recommends your approval of this agreement and your requests that you authorize me to execute it on behalf of the town.
So Peter, in the past, has the town had an agreement or an obligation to supply a ladder truck in case there were an emergency at the Vermont Yankee facility?
We have, and the consideration previously was related to the fact that there was a fire brigade maintained at the site when it was an active power-producing facility. And so we received compensation in the form of Entergy picking up a portion of the expenses related to the maintenance and filling of the air tanks that were used by our department and by their personnel. With the decommissioning process beginning and the fact that power isn't being generated there anymore, the fire brigade will be eliminated at the site. So they don't have a need for participating in the air pack exchange any longer, and so this agreement will replace that arrangement.
So this is a service that's going forward, and we're changing the nature of how we're getting reimbursed and making sure we're better protected in terms of indemnity?
That's correct.
Anybody else from the board have any questions? John?
I was just wondering, Chief, how many times have we responded down there over the years? Any idea?
I can remember 2 times we've done
That's what I thought.
that. Both outside fires, they're big transformers.
So outside the plant?
Inside the protected area, but
right.
outside the buildings, yes.
So it's not like we're down there every week.
Right.
Right.
Right. Be a very rare occurrence.
And we'll note once again that our own Kate O'Connor is chair of the...
Yes, she is.
Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel.
So if anybody has things that they want to talk about for the Citizens Advisory Panel. We're pleased to have Kate as a member of the board.
Entergy is nervous about her.
Any further comments or questions from anybody on the board? Anybody in attendance have any questions or comments? Ready for motion, please.
To authorize the town manager to execute the agreement between Entergy Vermont and Town of Brattleboro for ladder truck response to Entergy Vermont Yankee as presented.
We have a motion to authorize town manager to execute the agreement with Entergy Vermont. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. Next matter on the agenda is the town plan amendment. Second public hearing.
You're dominating our meetings with everybody, you know that.
It's not really been an ambition of mine, but yeah.
Before we open the public hearing, Rod, I'll ask you please to introduce yourself and to explain what's going to happen at this public hearing.
Hello, I'm Rod Francis, I'm the Planning Director. This public hearing is the second in two public hearings that are required under statute to amend the town plan. The purpose of amending the town plan this time around is to ensure that it contains the appropriate language and a map that describes the boundaries of the West Brattleboro Village Centre. We need to make this amendment so that we have the necessary information in the town plan to be eligible for a renewal of the West Brattleboro Village Centre designation, which expires in July of 2015.
Can you tell us also, before we open the public hearing, about the EPA grant?
Yes, I can. So it's a nationally competitive federal grant program. In terms of the application process, there are two broad pools: the beginner's pool, which we were in, those that have never received the grant before, and another pool of applicants, those that have received the funds previously. So we applied in 2013 and we were turned down, and we took on board some information about the quality of our application, made the necessary changes and reapplied this year, and we were successful. The total value of the grant is $400,000. There's no local match. The project is broken into two broad categories. One is for petroleum-related contamination sites, and the other is other hazardous materials. The $400,000 has about a 9.8% administrative component to it, which would cover the town's costs in operating the program, and the remaining 91% is paid out. Any site in Brattleboro will be eligible for consideration. If there's a history of potential petroleum use, that it would be processed through that fund, and if it was understood to be hazardous waste, it will be processed through the other fund. The purpose of the grant is to do what we call Phase 1 and Phase 2 studies. Phase 1 studies trace the historic land use of the site in question to establish whether there's a likelihood that contamination will be present. Phase 2 proceeds if there is the conclusion that it's likely to be contamination on the site, and the money is used to hire consultants to undertake the field work necessary to establish the kind and extent of the contamination and develop a plan for future use of that site. The benefit for us as a community, as an old mill town, basically, is that there's large numbers of sites in the older downtown areas of Brattleboro and some of the commercial development and industrial development to the north, that but for the lack of information about whether the site is contaminated or not, may not be regarded by the market as a viable redevelopment site. The advantage of redevelopment over greenfield development is that it maintains our compact form and extracts greater value out of our publicly owned infrastructure and other resources. So it is a smart growth strategy from that regard as well.
Rod, are these any brownfield sites, or they're just sites that we don't know about yet?
for the most part, we have a rough sense of what we're dealing with.
Right.
But the program hasn't even started, so it's we could take on projects that have already had some work done on them, or we could take on totally new projects. I need to emphasize that this funding source does not pay for the cleanup. It pays for the research that would lead to the cleanup. If we were to establish that there was a contaminated site and it needs to be cleaned up for subsequent use, then this information is vital for the seller and the buyer in that transaction, and any other public source of funds that would help remediate the contamination.
So I'm just picking one out. Elm Street, the old Snell building, was it?
Yep.
We know that's contaminated.
I don't know that. You might know that.
I'm not a rocket scientist.
I know. And I'm not paid to jump to conclusions. So
But can we use that money to?
Yep.
Yes.
If the current owner is interested in participating in the program, it's an eligible site.
Peter?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that for context that without naming additional names of potential sites, there are quite a few sites in town that we would all reasonably expect to have some level of contamination. And as Rod has pointed out, this work will allow us to know more explicitly what is on the site and what needs to be done to clean it up, which makes those sites more marketable, more viable for redevelopment. An optimistic view would be that we
Which
might
I'm
also...
working on. I'm working on it.
No. And that in itself is of real value, because it takes a site that people would say, well, I don't think I want to be involved with that site, and turns it into one that they can see the potential in. So that's important. The other thing that could happen out of this work is we may find certain sites where the current situation is a little more ambiguous. There's enough concern that it might be contaminated that it's not viewed as having as much potential as greenfield sites. But yet, once this work is done on such a site, it may determine that there really isn't anything significant there, or maybe nothing at all that needs to be cleaned up, in which case then that site becomes prime land for redevelopment. And in both cases, what we want to promote is as much redevelopment as possible, because of the reasons that Rod cited of why redeveloping existing sites is better for the community and less expensive for the developers than developing a new site.
Right. So the project is designed to deal with the perception of contamination as well as the reality of contamination. And what it does is establish scientifically whether the perception is true or justified or not. And so in our experience through the Wyndham Regional program and in other experience in other parts of the state and the country, I think it's fair to say that I've encountered more than one occasion where you would reasonably expect the site to be contaminated, and you found that there's been very minor impact, and that basically the site is viable without any major mitigating action. And so, but it's suffered. That site has always suffered from the perception that it's somehow contaminated.
I'll retract my statement about.
Good.
Yes, that's okay.
There's a perception.
Yeah, I'm sure that's accurate.
All right.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We're very excited.
Work.
Yep.
Dora?
Dora Bugler, Brattleboro. I just wanted to comment that what you were just discussing, there are situations where people don't necessarily know that a property is contaminated and they purchase it, and it becomes cost prohibitive for them to develop the property fully because they've had to pay for the testing and do all of that themselves as part of their project. The project over in the former laundromat, that's a case in point where they didn't realize it was contaminated, and they found out it was contaminated and had to do some remediation, and it's something like this probably would have been very helpful for the moving that project along and speeding it up.
Thank you. All right, so with that explanation about the purpose for the public hearing and that digression into the EPA grant, I now open the public hearing about the amendments of the town plan. And what I will note specifically is that we are here to take comments or any other information that anybody in the public wants to offer about proposed amendments to page 149 of the town plan, which describes the downtown district program and the designated village center in West Brattleboro. And that language is available for anybody who would like to review it. I'm not going to read it all, but it's been publicly posted and made available. Is there any public comment or comment from the board about the proposed amendment to the town plan? We should note that being a member of the designated downtown organization or designated downtown program makes us eligible for grants and signage and other state programs which are intended to encourage the strength and vitality of our designated downtowns. Hearing no comments, I now close the public hearing on the proposed town plan amendments. And, hold on a second. With the public hearing now having been, two public hearings now having been opened and closed, we're ready for a motion about the amendments to the town plan.
Propose we adopt the proposed Brattleboro Town Plan dated June 2015.
We have a motion to adopt the town plan as amended, dated as of June 2nd, 2015, in the manner described in these materials, which have been made publicly available.
And posted.
Is there any further discussion from anybody on the board or anybody who's in attendance? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And we opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. Now we're ready for a motion to ask the Wyndham Regional Commission to approve the town plan as it's been amended.
I move we request town plan approval from the Wyndham Regional Commission.
Is there any discussion about that? Rod, can you explain why we have to ask Wyndham Regional Commission to approve the town plan?
Yes. So typically, Brattleboro has practiced the procedure of adopting its own town plan and then seeking approval from the Regional Planning Commission under statute. If the town plan is approved by the Regional Planning Commission, we are eligible for grants and special consideration for a range of state programs. And so we regard that as beneficial to the process.
Any inquiry from Mr. Francis about that, or any comment or question? Anybody in attendance have any comments or questions? We have a motion to request town plan approval from the Wyndham Regional Commission. There being no further discussion or questions, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. Next matter on the agenda is approval or request for approval of the continuation of the West Brattleboro Village Center designation. Mr. Francis.
Let me just focus this. What you see in a very fuzzy outline.
Oh, it was me.
No, it's not your prescription. It's me.
I don't see any difference.
Yeah, it's getting harder and
You
harder.
can't tell anyway.
From
Yeah.
A or B.
The blue is the brook.
That's fine. We're happy the way it is.
Okay.
A or B.
People on TV will think it's probably.
I'm sure Jeff is screaming right now. Okay. So, one of the things that was missing from our town plan, partly because I think that the locals regard it as fairly obvious, is a map showing the village center designation boundary. That's what this map is. And then we included some language as to the nature of the West Brattleboro Village Center in terms of the designation, and those things were required for us to obtain renewal, which is coming up in July. So the purpose of the whole town plan amendment was to insert this language. The West Brattleboro Village Center was established through a consultant working on the project of establishing the historical integrity of the village And so the boundary line actually reflects the older buildings that form the nucleus of the village center. And so there is historic research involved in establishing the effective boundaries. We're not proposing change to the boundary. The boundary remains unchanged. It's simply a matter of inserting the map, ensuring that the information is correct and meets statutory requirements, and we can proceed. In the time that West Brattleboro Village Center has been designated, we don't believe anybody has taken advantage of the historic tax credits or other programs that they can avail themselves of as a consequence of West Brattleboro Village being a designated village center.
Not yet, you say?
Not yet.
Are there opportunities, do you think?
Yes, I think
Specific references, just are there opportunities?
I think there are opportunities. Yes.
And we can facilitate that to the extent that the designation is
Yes.
continued?
Yes.
Good.
And we're happy to consult with anybody who's considering taking advantage of the program.
Any further inquiries or comments from anybody on the board? Anybody in attendance have anything to say or any questions about the West Brattleboro Village Center
Village
designation?
Designation, yes, I know.
We're ready for a motion.
Authorize a renewal application for Village Center designation to the Vermont Downtown Program for the West Brattleboro Village Center.
We have a motion to authorize application for renewal of the downtown designation for West Brattleboro. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. Next matter on the agenda, I saw Moss walk in, is an update on the current status of pay-as-you-throw. Mr. Kaler and Mr. Moreland.
And Mr. Francis.
If I can do this. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Is that adequately focused?
From this angle, it looks to be pretty good. Does that look focused?
How dare they kick you out, Rod?
He'll be back.
He'll be back. So, good evening, everybody. I'm Assistant Town Manager Patrick Moreland. I'm here this evening with Moss Kaler, and we're going to provide a bit of an update on the town's transition to pay-as-you-throw. I'll be talking a little bit about some of the steps the town has taken over the course of the last year, and Moss will be giving a bit of an update on recent activities, particularly related to public education. So tonight is June 2nd, and in just about 4 weeks, the town of Brattleboro is going to undergo a significant transition in the way in which it pays for the collection and disposal of solid waste. We will be transitioning away from a system that is based largely on property taxes and towards a variable rate pricing system that will be based on the volume of solid waste that you and your household puts into the landfill. Now, that system is known as pay-as-you-throw, and I understand that pay-as-you-throw was debated in Brattleboro some years ago. But that debate is over, and the time for debate is over, largely as a result of the state adopting what's known as Vermont's Universal Recycling Law, or Act 148, which requires all municipalities to transition to a variable rate pricing system by July 1 of 2015. And I'm pleased to say that Brattleboro is right on track with its implementation. Just to remind us all how we got here, following the passage of Act 148, the Brattleboro Selectboard established what was called the Pay-as-you-throw Working Group. Now, this committee was populated with 5 individuals. Jane Southworth, who was formerly of the Solid Waste Committee. Carl Hirth, who's a local resident and lives out in West Brattleboro. Peter Gaskell, who's a local resident and also a manager of Triple T, who holds the town's collection contract. And Bob Spencer, who is a Vernon resident, but had recently overseen the transition to pay-as-you-throw in Vernon, and incidentally, he's also the executive director for the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District, so another very knowledgeable and helpful individual. And finally, Moss Kaler, the man sitting to my right, who's a local resident who has helped the town through other significant transitions involving solid waste in the recent past, which would include our transition to mandatory recycling and our transition to the curbside composting program. So it was a powerhouse of a committee for this particular issue, and that committee met often, meeting basically every other week through the summer, fall, and winter, to discuss the issue of pay-as-you-throw and to develop a set of recommendations, which were its charge from the Select Board, about how the town could implement a variable rate pricing system, one that would meet the requirements of the law and would be applied to the town's curbside collection program. Now, over the weeks and months, the committee met several times to discuss, among other things, what became known as the proxy. Now, the proxy is either the bag or the band or the sticker or the cart. And it is what the variable rate is based upon. And the committee discussed each of the pros and cons of these different proxies. They spent several weeks reviewing all available data after Moss had collected much of it and populated it into a really highly functional spreadsheet that helped to formulate what would be the recommendation for the pricing. The committee met and reviewed Brattleboro's solid waste ordinance and made a series of recommendations, and the town subsequently went through the process of adopting those ordinance changes, and recently those went into effect. And then the town also publicly solicited prices for the production of the bags and sought proposals for other ancillary services, including inventory and distribution services and assistance with getting those bags into the marketplace. Now, over time, the committee came and met with the Select Board on a number of occasions, and in early 2015, based on the recommendations of this committee, the board elected to proceed with the system based around the use of bags, that those bags would come in two different sizes, a small and a large, and I forget the exact gallonage, but Moss probably remembers.
15-gallon and 32-gallon.
And that the cost for these two bags would be $2 for the small bag and $3 for the large bag. After reviewing an analysis of the submissions from the various vendors that produce bags, the board was recommended and ultimately chose to enter into a contract with a company called Waste Zero because their bag prices were the least expensive and they made a good quality bag. In addition to that, after reviewing their submission, the town chose to enter into an agreement with them for distribution and inventory services to be able to provide those bags into the retail marketplace, and in conjunction with Moss Kaler to undertake a public education campaign, which Moss will be speaking to in just a couple of moments. I can now report that the bags have been produced, and there is a list behind me of retail locations in town. And Dottie's, that most of which have already placed an order, but each has committed to participating in as a retail location for the town's pay-as-you-throw bags. So at this point in time, we anticipate that bags will be for sale in these retail locations on or about June 15th, and that the bags will be required for use by June 29th. That's the week of July 1st. So from that point forward, June 29th, you will put your trash out at the curb just as you have in previous years. The only difference being is that this year, your garbage will need to be in one of the two pay-as-you-throw bags. Otherwise, your waste will be left at the curb, and we will have some discussions with you. And I know Moss and myself are intending to avail ourselves to any possible incidents, particularly in the first couple of weeks, and we're going to view that as an opportunity for additional public education. But the fact of the matter is the transition will require us to leave the solid waste at the curbside if it's not in an official Brattleboro pay-as-you-throw bag starting June 29th. Now, I spoke just briefly about some of the public education that has gone on. I think folks have probably seen some of that. But why don't I turn it over to Moss, and he can talk a little bit about some of the efforts that he has undertaken over the last weeks and months.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. One of the most noticeable aspects of the public education campaign was a town-wide mailing that took place in the month of April, and that was mailed to all residences in Brattleboro, though I suspect, unfortunately, that some percentage, a small percentage of people probably didn't realize the import of that mailing and perhaps didn't take a good look at it before they recycled it.
There's more available.
But they are still available. They've been handed out in public meetings. They're here at the town manager's office and online, the same mailing that went out to people. So it is available still to our residents. In that mailing, we indicated that there would be 9 public meetings, 2 at our local elementary schools, 6 at the ice rink in conjunction with the curbside compost cart distribution on May 2nd and May 23rd. And the last public meeting was held in this room just last Thursday night and broadcast on BCTV. And I believe they're going to replay that a number of times. I'm sure it's on their schedule between now and the start of Pay-As-You-Throw. And so there's a lot of information out there. There's been articles in the paper. We've been on WTSA, WKVT, and Tim Johnson and I videotaped a program on BCTV that was also made available over that station. The public meetings were attended, I would say, an average of about 12 to 20 people per meeting. I also held public meetings at all the Brattleboro Housing Authority properties, Melrose Terrace, Hayes Court, Moore Court, and Ledgewood Heights, as well as Mountain Home Trailer Park. And at Mountain Home Trailer Park, there were about 35 people in attendance. We were really packed in. Each of those meetings lasted approximately about an hour and a half, and that seemed to be a pretty regular length of time that it took to explain the Pay-As-You-Throw program, answer questions, and talk about recycling and what's recyclable and what's not, and also a similar discussion about curbside compost, what can be put in curbside compost, what is not appropriate. There was unlike 4 or 5 years ago, where there was a lot of discussion and debate about pay-as-you-throw, there was little to none of that in these 9 public meetings. Most residents simply wanted to know what they had to do to reduce the amount of trash and therefore reduce the number of pay-as-you-throw bags. They had a lot of questions about specific items, both in terms of recycling and curbside composting. Probably every person who went to those meetings came away learning something new that they didn't know, an item that they could additionally put in one of those 2 categories, or perhaps an item that they had been putting in one of those categories that should have been more appropriately put in another. So I think that a lot of information was imparted to people through those meetings, and I hope for people who missed out on it that they take a look at the Brattleboro website and also BCTV and check on those replays of those programs. Going forward in this next month, I'm still working with the Brattleboro Housing Authority properties to get their systems ready for pay-as-you-throw in their residents, as well as Mountain Home Trailer Park. I've made an offer to meet with them again, and they may take me up on that offer. And I'm currently redesigning the violation sticker that Triple T will be using for people who put out inappropriate trash in an inappropriate trash bag. And the sticker will be sort of one sticker, one size fits all. It's one sticker that will handle both recycling violations and curbside compost violations. And then there'll be a sticker for the trash as well. And for those people in the first week or two, or maybe even the first month, I think by a month, everybody in town should have a pretty darn good idea of that pay-as-you-throw is the new way of presenting your trash at the curb. But for those first few weeks, the drivers, when someone puts out trash in a non-pay-as-you-throw bag, not only will they put a violation sticker, more importantly, the violation sticker, just because it has an adhesive back, will be used to attach educational information to the trash bag that will be left at the curb. So they aren't just seeing a violation, which is really not our main purpose. The main purpose is to give them the educational information about pay-as-you-throw, where to buy the bags, and what's now required. And I'll be riding the truck a bunch in that first month, and we'll be seeing what happens in terms of illegal dumping, whether it's a problem or not, and we'll prepare ourselves as best we can for that, and hopefully we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Anybody on the board have any questions? Kate? Yeah.
Is there any plan to even send some kind of postcard mailing out to everybody saying June 29th is the day? Because remember when Steve from Waste Zero was here, he was saying if you send things out too early, people don't pay attention. And since the mailing we sent out was April, I mean, I don't know, is there any plan to even send something out?
Well, that would be a budgetary thing. I mean, it certainly could be done. There would be a cost associated with that of probably somewhere in the lane of about several $1,000s.
Just to do a postcard?
4,000 homes, right?
Yeah, about 5,000 approximately.
And this is going to sound stupid, I am on the select board, and I forget that it's June 29th. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just wondering, like, if there's some way to, I mean, you got 180 people that came to forums, but there's, what's that, 3,000 something that didn't come, and we sent the last mailing out in April. I mean, I'm just sort of concerned that we're going to find a lot of people who you're going to put violations to, not because they were trying to flout the law or anything, it's that they just had no clue because they forgot that it's June 29th.
And there are probably people who could tell you today it's the week of June 29th, and when that week comes, they may forget.
Right, I'm just saying that if
possible.
if the only mailing we've done went out in April,
Yeah.
and you know.
And there was like a lot of information in that pamphlet, that leaflet, something that's very clear.
Yeah.
Pay-as-you-throw starts this day, your garbage won't be picked up unless you put it in a bag that you purchased.
Well, I can probably have a price on that certainly by the end of the week, and I imagine that would not take long, and if the administration and the board wants to do that, I'm sure that could be mailed in that week previous to the 29th. That would be easy to do. We could list the stores again. We could list very, very basic information. Obviously, there's a large limit to what you could put on a postcard.
Yep. Peter?
The cost of that will be well within my authority. So if there's a consensus on the board that you would like such a mailing to occur, it'll be outside of the budget and the program that you approved a couple of months ago for this, but you know the rough order of magnitude it will be, and we'll just get a real price and I'll authorize it and we'll proceed.
You don't have to
The less information, the better.
Right, I understand. Postcard mailing.
Yeah, for sure.
Just bare bones?
I don't think you can do enough mailings.
Right.
I just don't. I don't think you can do enough mailing. Do you guys have a sense of what percentage on the first week people are not going to? You think 30%?
That's a really good question. I'm sure it'll probably be 90% or more, but even if it's 10% that don't get in the pay-as-you-throw trash bag, that would be 480 people.
Oh, I think it's going to be more.
So I will ask, out of my own curiosity, and I think the board is curious as well, ask Waste Zero, who has been involved in the rollouts in scores of towns, what if they have an experience to indicate what that is.
This has been, we've been talking about pay-as-you-throw for 5 or 6, 7 years. And if you don't know it by now, nothing.
No, I'm saying the date, start date.
Oh, if you don't know the start date by now, then you're living in a hole.
Well, I disagree.
I totally disagree with you. I think people
Yeah, hold on. We've agreed, does everybody believe that having another mailing would be a good idea?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't think we need a formal motion at this point. And maybe we'll have a chance to just review what gets generated with being king, so we're comfortable with what's going out. So, the information to be rolled out in very bullet form order is that you can buy your garbage bags at the Co-op and Dottie's, Brown and Roberts, Fireside True Value, Cumberland Farms, Hannaford's, and Price Chopper, starting in 2 weeks. And in order to have your garbage picked up, you got to put it in an approved garbage bag that you purchased. And you can reduce the cost of your trash collection by composting and recycling, which is free, except buying the bin. We encourage everybody to do this promptly. I guess I have a question about enforcement and follow-up starting on June 29th. Let's say every other house didn't put their trash in an approved bag. What's going to happen? It's all just going to sit at the curb with a sticker?
Yep.
And information, and a public information sheet.
All right, well, I hope that we're prepared to be doing some on-street follow-up promptly. It starts getting hot, and it'd be a drag to have a lot of rotting trash on the streets starting on June 29th. And that is the risk. And then we have a holiday week the next week, which similarly poses that sort of risk. So, off we go. Anybody else on the board? Patrick or Moss, you have anything else to add?
One final thing, this is the list today. We anticipate that this list may grow over time.
I would hope so, yeah.
Anybody who's in attendance have anything they want to say about pay-as-you-throw? Yes, ma'am. Hold on, you got to cut up, say your name and go to the mic.
Okay. Go ahead. So, get out. Do you want to? No, go ahead. Sorry. I'm Tamara Sten. I want to thank Moss and everything for the really good work you guys have been doing with the pay-as-you-throw. It's about time we got that program, so I think it's awesome. Yeah. So I'm really glad that we're on board with that. And I'm hoping it's going to really build people's awareness of how they use trash and choices they make. One of the things that I was concerned about, I put a little op-ed in the Reformer, was about being forced to have to purchase plastic bags, because me as just, a resident on this planet, I try to avoid plastic as much as possible because it is something that gets into our waste stream and doesn't ever go away. Mm-hmm. So what we do with our trash is we'll just put it into containers, or we'll use paper bags, or we'll just kind of be creative with it if we happen to have plastic laying around, but we don't buy it. So this program, even though I love the idea of paying for trash, I don't love having to purchase the plastic bags. So I researched a little bit, and like Greenfield, they started out like we did in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and did the pay-as-you-throw with plastic to get people used to the idea of like how much is my garbage and what does it cost. But after doing that for like a year, they switched to stickers, which are a little bit cheaper and easier to manage, and also lets people have the freedom to be able to choose what kind of trash receptacle they want to use. So if they want to use a reusable container, which is what we prefer, they can do that, so they're not adding to additional trash. Like I know with this program, we're imagining that we're going to be selling 77,000 plastic bags to residents this year. That's a huge amount of plastic going into our waste stream. And there was just a big conference up in Burlington, about all of the little plastic residuals that are being found in fish up in the lakes there, not to include our oceans as well. So that's my piece I want to throw out. I'm hoping that maybe we can start with this right now because it's a good place to start, but next year we can have a plan to move to a ticket system instead, like our neighbors in Greenfield. How could that be possible?
What?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One, Obviously, this transition is significant, and it's going to need to continue to be evaluated as it's implemented. So I would imagine we'll be back here discussing with the board at probably regular intervals how the program is moving ahead, ways in which we can see it as being successful, and also probably having to explain why certain things aren't working as best as we would have hoped. It's certainly possible that, that the town has, at this point in time, entered into a single-year agreement with Waste Zero, so there is the potential to make adjustments to the system in the future. And I suspect that together we'll be looking at the implementation and judging what's been successful and what's failed, and making adjustments as seem prudent.
Okay, is there a place for the public to continue to be engaged in that? Because I know, folks, I know you guys were really transparent in putting this together, but some of us missed it. And, when folks found out, we have to pay bags, who made that decision? People are interested in being part of the solution, so how can we stay involved?
Every meeting where this is discussed, either at the select board or if the Pay-As-You-Throw committee meets again, would be a publicly warned open meeting, and everyone's welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brenda Siegel. And the only question I have is, do you have something in place for low-income residents that really can't afford $3 a bag? Because I'm thinking at my own income level, even if 1 week I have to use 2 bags, even though I'm actually pretty good about how many bags I throw, that's $15 extra a month, and at my income level, that does impact my family's resources. So I'm wondering if you have anything in place to deal with low-income residents that maybe can't afford this as wonderful of a project as it might be.
I'll respond to that. The select board discussed on a whole series of occasions whether there was going to be any program to provide low-cost bags or free bags. The Vermont legislature decided that the way to shape public behavior is to make people at all income levels buy bags or pay for trash that's making its way to the landfill. And so the town has not adopted any mechanism for providing bags for people with low incomes. The essential theory is that controlling what's in the waste stream is the goal of this process. And separating out recycling and separating out compost results in almost no trash being generated from a household of 4 or 5 people. In my household with 4 people in it, we could probably go a couple weeks and fill up just a $2 bag.
And I can... I think that's wonderful. And I know that, at least in my life, and I know other peers of mine's life, it is an extreme, the amount of work that I have to do as a low-income person just to manage my life. What might seem very simple for you if you have a regular and very stable income and are not a single parent, may be very complicated for someone that can barely get the trash in the trash bag to the road. So, though I do try to make an effort, I'm not as good at it as some people who have more freedom of their time and money to do it. And so I'm concerned, and the other concern I have is that I could totally see someone taking their garbage bag and putting it in the town things because they just can't afford it. And they need to get the trash out of their house. And I think that that's actually, as much as you might see that as not legal and not all of those things, it also might be something that they have to do to get the trash out of their house to keep maggots and mice from coming if they just don't have any money, if they're not able to pay their electric bill. So I think it's something that does need to be dealt with because we have a huge low-income population in this town.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak? Dora?
Dora Bubalis, Brattleboro. I'm wondering what plan is in place for working with landlords. I know there's been some meetings with landlords, but for example, just on my walking around town, I probably know of about 4 places where there's mattresses and couches outside of houses that are multi-family houses that landlords, people have left, and there's not really any education about what people should be doing with those, and there's also no enforcement of landlords dealing with their properties. The other thing is that the ordinance requires landlords to provide receptacles. It requires them to provide trash receptacles, to recycling receptacles, and also now they should be providing compost receptacles for every unit that they have. If we're not requiring that and we're not enforcing that, then we've got a real problem, because that's what should be happening. So I'm wondering what the plan is in place for that.
Dora, there's a couple of...
Patrick, if you just speak to what the zoning ordinance, not the zoning ordinance, the solid waste ordinance does or does not require as to landlords and provision of composting buckets and recycling buckets.
Sure. There is at this time no obligation for the landlords to provide composting buckets or facilities. Composting at this point in time is a voluntary practice. It is not being required. I think we can look ahead with the full implementation of Act 148 and see that I think it's the year 2020 that composting at the residential level is going to be required, but that's some years away. So at this point in time, the ordinance does not require a landlord to provide that. It does require for households that participate in the town's curbside collection program to provide a trash can. And if there are violations of ordinances, either in the solid waste, to the solid waste ordinance or other zoning violations, I have to admit to a certain degree the town is responsive when the town is aware. So it's not uncommon to get calls at the town manager's office or in the zoning office about, there's a mattress that's been sitting on the curbside for a week, and when those calls and inquiries come in, we respond and take action.
It does require recycling, so.
It does require recycling, absolutely.
And many landlords do not have.
They can't hear you on TV, Dora, unless you stand up at the mic.
I said the ordinance does require recycling bins, and many landlords don't provide recycling bins, and they're supposed to have one per unit. So I'm just curious what the plan is for that, and as far as educating for compost bins as well.
Well, we've gone through a program of public education, and we will certainly be alert to the need for public enforcement as we transition June 29th, and we're going to see how it goes at this point, because we've done all the preparation we can, besides making bags available and doing another mailing here and getting as much press out as possible. Anything else from anybody who's in attendance? Moss?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that certainly by June 29th and probably sooner, there'll be not only the Brattleboro Town website available for people to get information, but also there'll be a Waste Zero website that is dedicated to Brattleboro's pay-as-you-throw and solid waste program. So there'll be an additional website. That one is really nicely thought out. It includes a list of stores, and you can click a Google map that actually shows you where the stores are located in town, as well as phone numbers and street addresses, and a host of other information.
Right, the website should be on the postcard. Yes, over here. Make sure to say your name, please.
Lissa Weinman, Brattleboro. I just wanted to suggest that I know I got a mailing, and maybe people saw the mailings, but what might be more effective for me is to do some postering, and I know that's also abhorrent because it's paper, but just to have some presence. And maybe you could have some kind of campaign that was like, come get a free bag, and maybe put aside a number of bags that people could come down to the West Brattleboro Fire Department or wherever, pick up some free bags that day and get the community out and picking up bags, and that would be a great reminder. I think maybe better than a mailing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. Yes.
I'm Betty Fry from Guilford, and often I'm not here, but I do watch it on TV at home. But I feel like I need to ask about the relationship, so there's clarity for everybody about the roll-offs What will be the relationship to this now, to the roll-offs in town?
You mean the recycling center at Fairground Road?
Well,
Is
by
that-
the high school more than that.
All right, well, I'm just going to
Okay.
step in and say that I think it's really beyond the scope of the pay-as-you-throw discussion that we had tonight.
You
We had a
don't see it as
lengthy-
part of it?
We had a lengthy discussion about 2 or 3 months ago about the roll-offs.
Okay,
For
so
right- wait,
what is it?
Please let me finish.
Okay.
For right now, the roll-offs are going to remain at Fairground Road. Whether that's going to change based upon changes at Wyndham Solid Waste Management District is an open question.
Okay, but for now, they're there.
The roll-offs are going to remain there for now.
Thank you.
That's right. I think the more garbage that winds up in the roll-offs, the less likely they're going to remain, would be my hunch. Dora?
I just wanted to say one thing because I wanted to respond to the issue of the plastic bags, because while I am not a big fan of using the plastic bags, I do want to say that anything that goes in the landfill is so tightly airlocked that it doesn't compost. And everything that's going in the trash is plastic. So while should be exactly. While I'm not happy about the idea, I mean, ultimately, our ultimate goal is we should be eliminating all plastic packaging so that we don't have any trash.
Anything further on pay-as-you-throw? Well, we'll look forward to a smooth transition on June 29th. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
What, June 29th? Huh? When? Where have you been? It's June 29th. In a hole? The next matter on the agenda is
Rod.
I'm not
No,
next.
no, he's not next on the agenda.
I'm just your audio visual
The
person.
next matter on the agenda is the NEA Our Town Grant. So I think what we'll do is I will bring us back to where we were at the end of the last meeting and talk about the topics that are on for discussion tonight and a couple of related matters. So at our meeting 2 weeks ago on May 19th, we had a discussion here at Select Board about the current status of the Our Town NEA grant. And without going in too much depth into what occurred, what I'll note is that we heard a number of very different visions about how we would move forward with respect to the NEA grant if we were going to move forward. And we heard about a lot of dissension that had been going on in terms of trying to work on the grant, particularly discord that had arisen over the year before. And we are, at this time, in a situation where the grant is scheduled to expire soon, like I think at the end of July, if I recall. And without an extension, it's very unlikely that we would be able to complete the work under the grant. And given the very, very different visions that were articulated by people who attended the meeting 2 weeks ago, it was not clear on May 26th that there was a common vision for how to proceed forward. And I think many of us felt it would be a real shame not to be able to reach common ground as a community in order to decide how to proceed forward. But that appeared to be a real possibility at the end of the meeting on May 26th, because everybody was saying something different. So we encouraged members of the arts community and anybody who was interested to work together and see if common ground could be reached in an effort to see whether we can chart a path forward and see if we can get an extension on this grant and maybe get the money to do some common good for the town. And I know that in the last 2 weeks, I've seen a substantial amount of correspondence, and I'm aware of a substantial level of communication among people in the community. And it does seem that people have been coming together in an effort to develop a shared common vision with the goal of trying to get this money into the town to serve the public good, which is exactly what our goal is. What I want to do is to address a couple of very narrow procedural issues. And then I'm going to ask members of the board if they've got anything that they want to contribute. Because at the end of the last meeting, there was some real, I think, confusion about where we stood and how we had gotten here and how we might move forward. And after we hear from members of the board, I think we're going to ask members of the public who are here to share with us where we may be having common ground to move forward. I know that you've been working on that intensely, and I know that other people have been consulting with him. And we actually have and Ms. Anderson has been working on that pretty intensely. And we have a proposal here for sort of an RFP, request for proposal, to do this work going forward. I guess procedurally, I want to just clarify a couple of things. The structure that we've got under this grant is that the town of Brattleboro, as the applicant and then the grantee, applied for a grant to the National Endowment for the Arts in the amount of $50,000, if I recall, in order to do a 3-track grant process. And that was cultural mapping, public discussions, and then culminating arts presentation or installation, temporary or permanent, to speak to the cultural values of the town as a whole. And essentially the first 2 tracks of the grant have been implemented. We have this, nifty, glossy book that we prepared after substantial work, and we had a series of public discussions. And I think we're really now at phase 3, which is what sort of art installation or presentation, temporary or permanent, can we move towards, and how can we get there? In terms of process and administration of the grant, I also want to speak very briefly, because there were some questions raised about open meeting law issues. The town does all sorts of business, and what we do is the people's business every day. There are a number of very specific laws that apply to making sure things are public. And one of those is the public records law. And the public records law applies to any of the documents that relate to this grant project and this grant administration. So all those materials are totally publicly available. There's also what's called the open meeting law. And the open meeting law is really much more narrow in scope. So the open meeting law has got a definition that it applies to actions or meetings of a public body, which means a board, council, or commission of the state or one of its subdivisions, or a board, council, or commission of instrumentality of the state, including the town, or committee of a board, council, or commission. The way the open meeting law works, this is a board of the town. And so we're subject to the open meeting law, and we don't do anything except in compliance with the open meeting law. All of our committees, Development Review Board, Agricultural Committee, Conservation Commission, Arts Committee, all the committees are subject to the open meeting law. When we adopted and approved this grant and accepted this grant, we delegated as the select board administration of that grant to the town manager. And also the planning director was recognized as a person responsible for administration of the grant under the grant document itself. And there was a team that was working on this project over time. I see Mr. Estes is here. He was part of the team that was working on administration of the grant, and Ms. Anderson also was part of that team over time. There's a lot of work that the town does that's not subject to the open meeting law. We have big grants, we have small grants, and it's only the work of a board, commission, or council and one of our committees that's subject to the open meeting law. So I'm fully confident that the open meeting law has been fully complied with in the way this matter's been worked on so far. We have to decide on what the process is going to be going forward. And I expect that it's going to be the select board ultimately is going to make decisions about the RFP that goes out and about what contract or contracts are awarded. And that'll all happen in public meetings. If there are other committees that we establish to have responsibility over these matters, they'll be subject to open meeting law. And I want to make sure everybody's aware. Transparency obviously is our goal, because we're not doing anything but the public's business here. And anybody wants to review any of the records that have led us here, ask for them. They're available. They've already been gathered before. And I know Mr. Wilmerding's had access to all of them and had a chance to go through them. And we encourage everybody to fully participate in this. I guess the only other thing that I'll say is I have some specific questions that I'll pose later on, but I do think that this prospectus that was presented to us and it's been made publicly available is a really nice start. And I want to thank everybody for reaching out to me and to each other in an effort to try to move this process forward. Anybody else from the board have anything they want to say about this NEAR our town grant? Ms. O'Connor?
Are you less confused?
I'm a little less confused. I mean, I'll be honest with you, at the end of the last meeting, I was ready to cut the cord, let it go, because it was really totally confusing to me. It didn't seem like anybody could work together. That's how I left. I've had 2 weeks now to sort of step back and think about it. And, you know, we have the draft RFP. So I'm feeling better. I'm not feeling like I did 2 weeks ago. Obviously, it's figuring out the process of how we get from this to the end, this meaning the RFP to the end. And that's sort of what, to me, is the big part in this, because everybody has, we might not agree on things, but we all have to get along enough that we can move the process to the end. So for me, that's sort of like the important next step is getting to the end, but getting there in a way that is a service to the town and gives the people that live here the respect and the opportunities that they should get, so we don't get into this funnel of going down the wrong way. So I've moved a little, I moved a lot, I guess, in the last 2 weeks.
John?
I was very confused at the end of it, but now after listening to so many people and reading all the letters and things that have come in, it would be awful for us to give that up. And so that's, I don't care how we get to the end. I really, if, shake hands, do whatever we got to do, but to give up an NEA grant, from what I've been reading, would just be an awful thing to do, because they don't hand them out that often. They don't, it's something that we should be proud of that we did get. And so again, however we get to the end of it, I really don't care how we get there, but let's just get there.
David, there's something you want to contribute? I know we're going to have to split.
No, I just want to, I'd like to hear about the draft prospectus that we have as soon as possible.
Excellent.
So I don't want to say anything on here.
The only other thing I'm going to do before we ask you and Kate to speak to this, I'm going to ask Peter briefly to talk about the financial aspect, because there's been some confusion about that. Approximately how much money's been spent, to what extent have we been reimbursed by the NEA or not, and then how much money is or may be available going forward.
Sure, thank you. The amount of money that has been spent to date, accounting for both cash expenses and in-kind expenses, is just less than $37,000.
How much?
$37,000. The amount that the town would be reimbursed depends upon, so far, we've not had any reimbursement under the grant. We're eligible for 50% matching. The amount that we would actually receive, I should say 100% matching, so 50% of the cost would be covered by the grant. The amount that we'd actually receive is going to depend in part, we believe, on whether we can successfully complete the third track. So I wouldn't speculate on where we might end up if we don't complete the project as far as recovering those costs that have been invested to date. However, when you look at the money that has been available to the town, what has been expended to date, what remains available, it is clear that there's approximately $22,000 remaining available to be spent towards the additional expenses of the grant in phase 3, track 3. And there's been discussion about private fundraising to add money to that, those available funds. I'm not personally aware of exactly what the status of what that is, but I think we'll probably hear something more about that this evening. And for every dollar of privately donated funds that would add to the $22,000 that's available, there would be, again, if we can see this project through to successful completion, there'd be a matching dollar from the NEA through the grant for that. So,
up to how much?
Well, in the total final cost of everything that would be reimbursable would be $50,000 of local money matched by $50,000 of federal money. In terms of where we stand in the document that's before you this evening, there's a working tentative budget figure of $38,000 that would be available for the art. So the in-kind expenses for track 3 would be separate from that, but the cash available to actually pay an artist to complete a project for track 3 is estimated to be $38,000. That presumes then, I believe, $8,000 of private money would be donated, matched by $8,000 of NEA money would add to this $22,000 that we believe is available.
So essentially, if we can raise $8,000 private money, we hope to be able to get $30,000 from the NEA to about $38,000 to spend. That's wrong.
Yeah, the 30,000 figure, I think, adds confusion there. But yes, what we have in hand that we could commit if we were to publish an RFP document tomorrow, we could offer $22,000. It's actually $21,738 is what the accounting indicates would be available to pay an artist to complete a project under track 3. So we've rounded that to $22,000 for talking purposes. If there were an additional $8,000 of private money donated to the project, then that by having that additional $8,000 matched by the NEA, it would add $16,000 to the pot. The 16 plus the 22 are $38,000. I believe that's how the 38 has been identified as in the prospectus as the amount that would be available to pay an artist.
But we still haven't been reimbursed completely by...
We haven't been reimbursed anything yet. Right. So if the ultimate determination is that the outcome is disappointing, but we can't continue and complete under track 3, we would still seek reimbursement for the work that's gone on under the grant. We would hope to recover what we would be eligible for through the NEA for tracks 1 and 2. Right. We don't know exactly where that would end up with the, in terms of that process. We have a high level of confidence that if the NEA grants us additional time, and if the community can rally to a solution that does lead us all to a successful outcome for track 3, that we would then ultimately receive 50% reimbursement for what's been expended.
I guess I need to inquire, in the worst case scenario, if the grant were to fall through and the NEA were to give us nothing, how much money would the town be left having expended that we need to find out of our operating budget? Can you answer that today?
I can. We wouldn't need to find money because it's been expended, but what would happen is money we had expected to recover, we would not recover, so we would be out that money. And what that totals to is the $36,642 that has been spent to date minus the in-kind expenses. So those in-kind expenses amount to approximately $13,000, so there'd be approximately $23,000 out of pocket that the town would not recover.
So far we've got $23,000 to $25,000 into this cash.
That's correct.
That we haven't got back from the NEA yet.
That's correct.
Okay, excellent. Rod?
Let me just correct that. Of the monies that are expended, there's been already some private philanthropic contribution, and so the actual hard cash that the town's expended so far is $10,000.
Okay, very good, thank you. Thank you.
That's better.
Yeah, it is. Anybody else from the board at this point? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to speak to, you and Kate, whoever wants to go first, to speak to the development of this draft prospectus that was included in our materials, and what process you currently anticipate or hope to see adopted and endorsed by the select board. And I don't know which one of you wants to speak first. Yeah, you can. If you want. Yeah. Make sure to introduce yourselves.
Hugh Keelan. I live on Green Street in Brattleboro, and I want to thank Kate and John for publicly expressing the movement that you've taken from confusion to less confusion, and if I may so describe it, even considering championing this thing in the face of adversity and have it move forward. Thank you. That's extraordinary and wonderful for us to hear publicly. Thank you. So I'll start just by reading what I sent to the select board. I mean Kate and myself sent to the select board since we were the designated parties last remarked by David in the May meeting. So to the many it may concern concerning our town grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. The game has changed owing to the timely intervention of the Select Board. A request for proposals, which you are holding in front of you, I believe, based on past work, the thorough input of town offices and interested parties has been prepared. This is, in itself, a triumph of collaboration, including the sum of the award, and I hear the questions about the 22 and 38, the timeline, the relationship to the NEA, an extension, and a broad adjudication structure for proposals. It has been accepted to be vetted for viability by the town. Of course, we hope the Select Board to approve. We particularly acknowledge the grant manager, the town planner, the town manager, and their offices for thorough and committed guidance with the clear goal, as expressed by those officers and persons, with the clear goal of the grant going forward. Next point, there's agreement about a request for extension. Next point, funds continue to be raised to match Doug Cox's pledge of $5,000. We expect to have sums in excess of these match funds, though not by June 2nd, which is of course today. This could allow us the very attractive sum of $38,000 available for track 3. A noticeable number of interested parties, many of whom are here this evening. The cameras may care to look at all the interested parties who are here because of their interest in the forward motion of this artwork, of this art project. Of course, they may be here for other reasons too. But a noticeable number of interested parties have emerged to assist and support since the last meeting. A task force has been assembled to guide, advise, and communicate to our constituencies, and some have committed to come on June the 2nd to speak in favour of our process. Now, this task force is interested in assisting with the adjudication procedure that has been conditionally entrusted to the Town Arts Committee, and I hope I have not misrepresented some of the final sentences from the last Select Board meeting. We think this is an ideal long list group for proposals received. Furthermore, a structure is emerging for final adjudication. And parenthetically, we would love to participate with you in creating the next levels of participation and adjudication, post receiving the proposals that will come in. And again, you've started to redefine yourselves as champions of the grant, right? This is so wonderful. The language you're using suggests that you want forward movement for this thing. So thank you for your championship of this happening. So we believe, and we really hope we're not deceiving ourselves, that we have taken steps along the lines that the Select Board requested. And we are very encouraged by the enthusiastic public response and input that we have had in very short order. We remain committed to the interests of the town as handled by the Select Board. And looking to the future of our town, sincerely, Kate Anderson and Hugh Keelan. So just to give a picture of the level of interest and involvement that the last meeting generated, and I would say positive interest and involvement the last meeting generated, communications have been received from Senator Leahy's office. He's aware and very interested in our granting process and the NEA. And he and his office pressed the importance of Brattleboro completing the NEA grant and drawing the full dollar sum down from the federal government. Now, if we to follow simply that direction, we have yet more fundraising to do. And again, we request your partnership in creating the time frame in which that's done so that it's sensible, manageable, reasonable, and maximal for the quality of the award that will flow out of this grant, right? We obviously want that sum that's announced to be as high as it can be. That's how we value the town. Let's see. Yeah, so I think it's pretty clear, and this is based on lots of different types of conversation with lots of interested parties, that the National Endowment for the Arts really wants its projects to succeed. They don't want to see something slipping away into discord and failure and mediocrity. Now, being in touch with and connecting with the NEA is the best way to affect our success in the matter of deadlines and contract adjustments. There are opinions that the contract adjustments and extensions are going to be very easily and comfortably handled given what we're beginning to create. They want their program to work, and there are other programs geographically around us that are reporting a very complex array of relationships with the NEA. It's not one size fits all, it's not straight lined. Good. I wanted you to know about that. I think that's all that I have to say. I got to say, it's been a very exciting couple of weeks, and everything that has bubbled up has been contributive, positive, combination of specialist energies, I'm not going to give any names for anybody, a combination of town interests, public interests, those who don't have a primary interest in the arts. Lots and lots of people are moving towards us, and I wanted you to know about that.
Thank you. Kate?
Kate Anderson, Western Avenue, Brattleboro. Ditto. The one element I think that is yet maybe not thoroughly discussed is how to bring forward an informational, possibly, to the public so that we get an idea of what creative placemaking is about. This is not simply an arts grant. This is a creative placemaking grant. So it possibly we would find a way to, without using any of the funds, to present those who have come forward on a task force might be able to come forward and present to the community what these projects might look like. They're incredibly inspiring and just not to say this is what you should do or how you should do it, but to act as a stimulus for some good thinking on this. Yeah, so probably the best thing to do might be to just field questions.
Well, what I'd like to do before we get there is to just speak a little bit about the process you envision going forward as reflected in this prospectus. I've had a chance to read it, but I think that it's useful to talk about what we're thinking of. So if either one of you briefly, without reading the document,
Right.
but just want to speak to what you envision at this point.
So in broadest of terms, there will be a notice published that there will be a request for proposals once this draft is then in totally finalized form. Then the public will become aware. Then there will be a vetting process of the proposals that will come in. Anything that is just completely inappropriate, a project that is going to cost $5 million will be completely inappropriate, that we can sort out down to a more manageable number, probably. And then a selection committee needs to be formed so that we can move forward with that. That's broadest of terms.
Can I just ask, now, this is all dependent on whether we get an extension. Am I correct
my
on that?
assumption is on the extension, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
Because there's no way this is going to happen by, when is the grant?
July 31st.
July 31st.
Yeah.
So we're just hoping that,
Yeah, so you'll see in the prospectus that you've gotten
Right.
that we have a plus 6 months
Right.
timeframe.
is there any limit on how much you can raise? Not counting matching, but, I mean, is there a limit on what people can contribute to this?
That's a good question.
Rob, do you know
I
the
don't
answer?
think so. I don't think
I mean, I know that there's a certain amount that
Yeah.
will only be matched by
Right.
NEA, but, I mean, after that, if,
I don't believe there's any prohibition on private funding that exceeds the agreed upon match.
okay.
Well, that's pretty great.
If we raise more money.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. And then I guess I have a question just in terms of current status. The Arts Committee, as currently exists, has how many members?
5.
Well, yeah, but what's it?
Oh,
Well, wait a
there-
minute. What is it? What's its maximum number, Jan?
8.
8? We don't generally form even number committees because then you can't make a decision.
Right.
It was discussed in the meeting when we did it, and that's what ended up.
8 members. All right, that's kind of silly. And so there's an 8-member committee, and there's 5 members at this point.
Yes.
So 5 members is a quorum.
So scheduling is the issue.
Okay. And it's possible that 2 meetings from now, we could put on the agenda to revisit the size of that committee and the composition if anybody wants to put their names in. And we could use the Town Arts Committee as the first body to make a specific recommendation about final terms of the prospectus, and then pass that on to Select Board for consideration approval after the administration looks at it. That's a mechanism.
And if we're going to do that, we should change it to an odd number. It just.
Even odder, yep. Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Dave, Kate? All right, so that's the general structure, and that's where you've come to. Thank you so much for your input. I guess that anybody who wants to speak to the possibility of moving forward with this and to the process we've discussed is fine. But Ms. Borowski, please, let's keep it shorter than last time, and let's focus on this issue rather than on how the Arts Committee's been functioning, if we could.
Scott Borowski, Main Street, Brattleboro. The first thing I'd like to ask, and specifically to Kate, I think this is what I'm talking about. I've noticed over the years that the Art Committee has set up very idealistic thresholds for art projects. I don't know why everyone seems to throw all of their ideals and greatest expectations at art, because if it was thrown at anything else, it would be impossible to get anything done. And so I'm going to ask for the people involved in the grant not to make any prerequisite suggestions as to what artists should do, to leave it entirely open and not put any parameters except what the grant itself specifies. In other words, not to close down what anyone would put in as a idea by suggesting anything at all. I ask you not to do that because it's prohibitive. It doesn't help. It hasn't helped the art committee.
Wait, I'm going to ask not to have discussion back and forth. So, Scott, anything else?
Yes. There's been 2 weeks. Evidently, there's been a lot of stuff done. I think the thing that people are going to actually, that people want and been waiting for a long time, is the paperwork, how to make this proposal. And I'm hoping that after this 2 weeks, that they now have this paperwork so people can look at it and say, do I have to write 2 essay questions or put my resume or what? We need that, and I hope we have it by now. I'm asking if we do.
Okay, so in the materials that were distributed with the select board meeting agenda and that were made publicly available online, there is a draft prospectus dated 5/28/15. Jan Anderson may have copies, and you can have one. It has a series of goals and guiding criteria in it, and it's available for you to look at.
Does it say what you're supposed to do to make you? Okay,
It's a
great.
start. Yeah.
One more quick question in terms of addressing funding. If a proposal can bring more funding in the proposal as part of the proposal, in other words, if the artist finds other funds, is this okay? Can you do this? And is this something that you're looking at, and an idea that you look at and say, that's good, that's what we need, that will help this proposal go through? Should we answer?
I think you can go ahead.
Yeah. So there's no earthly reason why not. It's so even judging it from your initial parameters of not eliminating stuff, which we very much agree with. We have no interest in eliminating forms of art or types of artist or any limiting parameter. So with that, and I certainly have agreement with you, Scott, about that, with that, at first sight, there should be no elimination of exactly the model that you're talking about. I guess I would just be curious as to if there's any conflict of interest clause in this, so that people that are making the selection on the committee or making the selection, them and their friends, will not be considered for the proposals.
I think that we're getting at this point a little bit beyond the scope. What I will say is that the process to be developed going forward has not yet been finalized, but I expect ultimately we're going to have a public committee that's going to be vetting various submissions, and I think we are heading towards the select board making the final decision.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, you said your name before?
Brenda.
Ms. Siegel.
Okay. I'm Brenda Siegel again. First of all, I just want to say that it's actually in the proposal, I just read it, that there is a conflict of interest clause. So, secondly, this isn't what I came here to say, but what just came up, the fundraising extra money, that concerns me. I'd actually ask that it be limited to that $8,000, and this is why. The arts organizations in this town that already exist, in addition to the other nonprofit organizations in this town that already exist, are struggling to raise money right now. So I think taking away fundraising ability from all those organizations by raising even more money, because I think we can do this job in the amount of money that exists. So I think making it even harder for the arts organizations that exist here to raise money is a big mistake. It's already like, for example, the Southern Vermont Dance Festival, my full-time job is struggling to raise money for it when it's this amazing festival that brings so much to town. So we want to make sure that we don't do that. We want to make sure that we make this bring more, not take away. That's my first thing. Then as as an arts person, I do like what I see. I wonder if there is a possibility within the grant to split this project up into a couple of different things, a couple of different installations, a performing arts one, a visual arts one, because it is actually a lot of money that's going towards it, and it seems like it could be split up into 3 different types so that it was spread out. Also, if I would love to see something in there that puts some money towards advertising whatever the installation is, so that we are bringing people to our town for that. I think that would be really important. I think the possibility should be set forth that there are some artists that might be able to do it within the time frame of the grant, because that is, if you do the process the way the timeline that was shown, there are a couple of different organizations and individual artists who I could see who could possibly do that. So they might that idea that you can propose it could be done should be in there, not that it should be chosen for that reason. And most importantly, I was helping with the arts calendar, and I wasn't here last week, so I didn't get to see that whole that take place. I think that was a great thing. I think learning a little more about the grant. I'm not sure how it fit or not fit. I don't know enough about the grant. I was interested in the calendar. But I think getting an installation, making sure whatever you choose for the piece of art or pieces of art is something that truly highlights our town and truly grabs the people from out of town and truly doesn't just help that artist or that person or our town as a whole, but also all of the artists, that really highlights what our town has to offer, because it's such an amazing arts town. Performing arts get a little bit, I'm sure as you know, they aren't the first thing that people think of when they think of Brattleboro. We have amazing performing arts, we have amazing visual arts, and to really fully encompass it within the grant is something that I would like to see happen. I was a little disappointed in the way the beginning of the money was spent. I felt like I was being educated about why arts are important, because the only people that were at those meetings were artists. So I didn't need that money to be spent on that. I wanted that money to be spent on doing this, what we're doing now. So I think it's fantastic. I don't know if you have any, if I said several things in there, I don't know if there's any questions in there about that. But I think it's great. I just want to see.
I think we're all set right now. Thank you, Brenda, for your comments. Sure, Mr. Dimmick.
Good evening. I'm John Dimmick. I'm the president of the Arts Council in Wyndham County, but I'm here more as an individual tonight, not necessarily representing the council. My understanding is that the decision tonight by this board is whether or not this will come to conclusion. The phase 3, it sounds like it's going pretty well in a positive direction, and I'm pleased about that. I'm speaking more as somebody who's invested quite a bit of time and energy over the last couple of years, and I think it would be a mistake to not let the program finish to its conclusion. It would look badly, I think, for the town of Brattleboro to turn back the grant. So thank you for your efforts.
Thanks for coming. Ms. Holiday?
Hi, Barbara Holiday. I just have a question, excuse me, about track 1 and track 2. During the last meeting, you said they weren't finished and there was still funding there, Kate. And this sort of addresses what Brenda said. Excuse me. In terms of having a comprehensive grid that includes all of the artists, all of the performing arts companies, the nonprofits, the individuals, is there still room for that to be furthered a little bit? I wasn't included. There are a lot of artists that weren't included. And that's kind of what the basis and beginning of this grant was, to create an arts designated community. And I think track 1 and track 2 aren't completed, and that those will take care of the marketing and the cohesiveness of the community and being able to present it to a larger market, a larger audience. So I would encourage, please, to revisit track 1 and track 2 and to do the job that the grant was actually intended to do. And that in itself will do that job of lifting up the boat, as it were. So thank you very much to you for your efforts.
Thank you.
And I liked your original proposal. And one last thing, if there was such connection and continuity in the grant, that the grant was awarded in the first place, that still exists. So Thank you.
Thanks. Dora?
Dora Bubalis, Brattleboro. I'm glad that we're moving forward. I do have a concern about the timeline in the draft proposal, because it's 12 days. That's a really hard time period to get the materials out, for people to do that, and for people to come up with a good proposal. And we don't want to waste more money on art that isn't the best representation about what Brattleboro is as an arts community. I'm also inquiring because it is a federal grant. Is it subject to federal bidding process? Because if it is, 12 days probably isn't enough time to meet those standards. So I think if we're going to ask for an extension, that we should make part of it that we give enough time for people to actually get proposals in, so we get really, really good proposals. And as we know, I mean, the idea of coming up with an idea, putting it together, coming up with a budget, writing it up in a proposal is a lot for anybody, but it's often especially a lot for artists who are up here, in their thinking. So, let's think.
They've been doing this their whole lives. They pretty much know their stuff.
So, I'm not saying that they don't know how to do that. I'm saying that 12 days is a lot of, to come up with something new. So, I mean, there may be some people who already have ideas that already have proposals, but we want everybody, so.
Thank you, Dora, for your comments about the timelines. Yes, we're aware of the tight timelines in the original proposal, and they have caught our attention. Ms. Wilmerding.
John Wilmerding, 2nd District and a member of the Arts Committee. I think there's a little more that the Select Board can and possibly should consider doing at this particular moment in time. I think that some of us probably would like to advocate for the continuation of the grant or another extension, perhaps a brief extension, to fulfill the terms of Phase 3. I personally would like to be able to do that in terms of writing to senators and congressmen or whatnot. I think that the Select Board could recognize that there is, to move forward, there is necessary to have a designation of the recognized executive team that's going to carry the grant forward. We have the town manager's office, we have the Select Board, and these are the executive branch of our town government, as I understand it. The Select Board could indicate by a resolution that it's prepared to accept that a request for proposals will go out, and it could designate the town manager's office to approve the final form, including the dates that would be part of that request for proposals. And I think that that would be enough of a concrete and good faith indication to all concerned that, that we could proceed with great optimism here.
Thank you, Ms. Wilmerding. Anybody else want to speak to this right now? Was it Ms. Wyman?
I would second Ms. Lissa Weinman.
Thank you.
Brattleboro. I would second John Wilmerding's thoughts on the matter, and also advocate for moving forward with the RFP and asking for the extension. And I also think the Town Arts Committee is the appropriate body that should decide upon and vet those proposals. Because I think that it's evidenced by the lack of participation that the Town Arts Committee is weak. And it should play in this growing creative economy here in the town a greater role moving forward. So investing in the Town Arts Committee and getting people on there who are committed not just for this proposal, but to put in their public service time for the town arts community in general, I see that as the right vehicle for decision-making for this grant. for all the public meeting reasons and everything you've mentioned before. So I do see that. And also to Brenda, I don't know, I agree with Scott that you should just, no conditions on the grant other than what the NEA has already put forth for what the NEA is looking for. That's your criteria. So there won't be any other conditions, I would say, on that. And then if people want to see more collaborative efforts, I would say that's up to the artists to put together on their own and present as 2 or 3 artists or institutions here in town put forth a proposal that would bind them for the amount of money we're talking about forward, instead of expecting the town committee to do that bundling. So that's, I think that's all I wanted to say. Yeah, thank everybody for the efforts on this. It would be a shame to let it go. I hope everybody seems confident the town can raise the matching funds through private funds. I think we should definitely do it.
Thank you. Anybody else who's in attendance want to speak to this? Briefly, Ms. Borowski, sure.
Just wanted to add my opinion that 12 days is much too short for anyone professional to create a good proposal.
Thank you. Dora, same caution, please.
Dora Bullis, I wasn't going to say anything again, but I just thinking about something that Ms. Weinman said. I think what was being thought out was that you might get different proposals if you had 3 different aspects of a grant, a performing arts, a visual arts, or whatever, because people would say, oh, it's kind of like the fact that they broke out the BDCC grants so that there's a food component and a business component, because they got so many proposals that were food components, but they wouldn't necessarily compete with sort of a higher financial job-getting other kind of business proposal. So I think that's where that came from. I don't know, I mean, I think it's something to consider.
Thank you. Ms. Siegel?
So the only thing that I did forget to say was that, and I really was what I came here to say, was that it would be a huge mistake to let this grant go, because we would never get a grant like this again, and we would be looked at in a very bad way. And my experience with grants is that if we make any real mistakes with the grant, it isn't just that grant, but other grants. It filters into other opportunities, and so we really have to fix this problem. We have to collaborate. We have to make it work. I think that's like, in the arts, that's crucial, because your reputation is part of how you get money to do arts.
Thank you. Mr. Wilmerding?
I'm going to say what I've offered before is largely, I think, professionally based suggestions or advice. I want to say something personally. In my work in this community, I know that there are scores of arts organizations, large and small, and there are many hundreds, maybe over 1,000 individual artists. And a lot of these people have trouble making ends meet. They are totally dedicated and heart-driven in their art. And I would like to see somehow some element be built into the grant selection process that would assess the true merit of every proposal, certainly, but also prioritize people who would not be able to do, and organizations who would not be able to do what they're proposing to do at all, would not even have the slightest thought of doing it, without the little bit of boost and the leverage that part of our town grant program could give them. Because if we give them a small grant, they might be able to leverage that into something bigger. I am not of the opinion that there's a shortage of money out there. I've worked in the arts in this community for almost a quarter century, and there's gold in them thar hills. There really is. There's a lot of money out there to support worthy arts and cultural enterprises. So I want to encourage everyone here to be optimistic about that. But I also wanted to say that I think the select board and the town executive should take under advisement the grant language, the language in the grant description and narrative, and the language which some of which has wound up into the draft request for proposals. Take it under advisement, because my understanding after doing so myself with a number of parties is that it will be the true intrinsic merit of the proposals that we receive, which I think will carry them and will persuade all concerned that they're worthy of support.
Thank you, John. I'm going to now look over to members of the select board. David, do you want to speak?
Well, I think I'm kind of sort of anxious to get things underway, and I'm a little confused about the application requirements call for electronic submission by June 14th. And then but then on the timeline on the third page, the deadline for proposal submissions is July 6th, but either one of those is not very long from now. I've heard a couple of people say it's not much time. So my question is, at what point, I don't know what action we have to take, but if there's going to be an RFP, at what point does this have to get finalized and in wherever it goes? And how's that going to happen? And basically, what are the next steps and the deadline to get this out?
Do you have other comments or questions as well, or is that it for now?
That's it for now.
Great, you like that?
Get it done.
Anybody on the other side of the table there have anything?
Well, we've got our own little meeting going here.
Yeah, well, let's share.
No, we're sharing. No,
This is,
go ahead.
no, John was asking about, isn't this all contingent upon the extension? And what I was saying is we have to start this process to get it rolling.
Right.
And it might come to a screeching halt if we don't get the extension.
I agree with that.
Right.
So, John?
No,
Anything
no,
else?
Does that make sense?
no, I'm still confused, on the fact that it's such a short period.
All right, well,
So that's where I'm,
procedurally,
right.
I think what's going to happen is that this prospectus or this project description or RFP description needs to be finalized for select board approval. And whoever suggested that the committee, Town Arts Committee, would be making the decision, I'm not in favor of that. I think that the Town Arts Committee, whether by majority, if there's a quorum of that committee, or if there's no quorum, then just as a working group, should gather whatever information, whatever additional input there may be, and make sure whether there's any changes that we want to make to what's been presented based upon what's been offered here tonight, whether it's expanding this to visual and performance, and was there a third? Visual performance and visual and performance art, and whether we can refer more broadly to the grant criteria. I have a couple of other specific comments. And also, I know that the administration wants to weigh in and try to have a little bit more detail into the selection process so that there's some more detail included in that. I have a couple of other specific items relating to this prospectus, and so I would then like to make sure that all input is gathered between now and the 16th, and then see that on the 16th we have a prospectus with realistic timelines in it and with realistic 2 weeks from now to gather all input and to begin and hopefully to be able to approve this. I don't like the word prospectus, but it's really a matter of a public listing or a public,
Right.
whatever it is. It's a public notice of request for RFPs. I'll be with you in 1 second. And yeah, I hoped. And I will also then just make my individual comments about this. I do think the timeline's too short. I agree with all that. And I hope that we can be planning towards timelines that will take us to the end of whatever extension is going to be granted. if it's going to be granted, and I know that Mr. Francis has begun discussions with the NEA, and they won't commit to anything. They've asked us for some information that may or may not get us an extension, but we've begun that dialogue. And I continue really to like these public art policies. And so I hope that besides referring to the language of the grant document and to the other general goals that are in the artwork goals as referenced in this draft prospectus, although I don't like the word prospectus, I hope that we can refer to the public art policies and to the language of the grant document. I also don't see the reason why the location guidelines would be included here. I don't see that we should be constricting the place where the installation or presentation, temporary or permanent, will occur. I think that this is a full town matter, and we should see what people recommend and suggest. So I'd like to see those location guidelines removed. Other than that, the language of the prospectus, and I don't like the word, seems relatively well articulated, but I like broader references and a reference to the public art policy and fixing the timelines and then broadening out the selection process. Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to suggest that we could move away from the word prospectus and
I don't think he likes it.
And call it a plan of action. And the reason I'd like to do that, or an action plan, whatever people like better, but that's what this, I believe, was intended to be. And I guess more to the point of owning and being responsible for my observation, I think it needs to be that as the next step. And the step beyond that is to have an RFP that, within the context of the action plan, is the right RFP to go out, to bring this thing forward, to draw the kinds of proposals that people have been talking about, that can create a successful final outcome to track 3 and to the grant. The next document that you see, and the document that hopefully you'd be able to approve 2 weeks from tonight, needs to be one that identifies very explicitly a process and a structure for how we will achieve the success, and be less focused on that type of art that will constitute the success in the end. I think that needs to flow from the action plan that would give you the level of confidence that we can get there.
Okay.
Well, I think the reason that there's all this positive energy in the room, and the reason that we're actually looking at concrete steps moving forward, is because there was such intense pressure because of the deadlines. And I think that, and I look at November 20th as project completed, and I think, okay, after November 20th is winter. And do we want this process to be going on through the winter and through the spring and maybe culminate next summer? I don't. I would like it to happen quickly, although I've heard from people that it's really hard to do. The only place where we can compress the timeline is between right now and getting the proposal you just described and moving it. And I don't know if it's possible for you to do that in a week. It's like, we're not scheduled to meet next week, so we've got time. And I think if there's not continuing pressure, if there's not the pressure of a deadline, I'm not at all confident that it'll go forward. And if we've got, in a week, we've got a solid proposal that we're going to a plan that we're moving forward with, it seems like the NEA would be much more likely to look favorably upon it than if we sent them more amorphous information about, gee, we're hoping that this will be done and we're going to do this and that. And as opposed to a concrete proposal, this is in the mail, we're putting this out. Can we have an extra 2 months or whatever this calls for? So that's my argument for moving way more quickly, unless it's just not possible. But I have a sense that you folks can probably find the time to hammer something out and get it to us.
Do we have a concrete proposal? I mean,
Well, we have this draft prospectus, but we need the action plan to be approved by the board. And it needs to be finalized after gathering whatever input there may be through whatever group is going to do that, and then having administration weigh in so that we got a real concrete action plan that then ties back in to the request for the extension. I do think 2 weeks is probably necessary to do that with all deference and recognizing
I think you're right. I just don't think we If we're going to compress it, we should compress this part of it and not the creative part of it.
On this side of the table, anything more right now?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. Who should communicate with whom in creating what you're inviting to be created?
And then Dora, do you have a question or comment?
I do, because I had a thought related.
Go ahead, yeah.
So, just sort of a thought based on whether or not we get the extension, because if it becomes apparent that something has to be done in order to get an extension, or the extension isn't going to happen, I just was thinking that you could have a shorter time period in which people could put in a sort of summary one-page thing where they could, do like an intent, and then a longer time period to do a full proposal. Just something to think about.
Thank you. What I'm going to note is that the grant language, as I read it last week, required completion at the end of the grant term. And so I think we're going to be working towards whatever extension we get. And right now we're thinking, from what I'm hearing, 6 months, which would take us to January 31 or thereabouts. And sir, I didn't get your name and you didn't get to speak. Why don't you take the mic and tell us your name?
Thank you. John Gittleson. I live in Brattleboro.
All right, thank you for your email.
You're welcome. I'm an artist who's worked on a lot of public art commissions before and had experience with some of this. And it seems to me that one of the smartest ways to possibly get an extension would be to send out a call prior to the end of July deadline. So it looks like something's already in effect. I don't know that there has to be an answer at that point, but just to say that we are in the process. It's easier to cancel a call in progress, which would be my recommendation. The other thing is that typically when applying for a public art grant or proposal, there's a couple of months in which you can make your proposal. But that being said, because of the tight timeline, I think a month could be doable. Anything less than that, I think, is a bit unrealistic. A month it's under the gun, but it's possible. My other suggestion would be that if you can demonstrate that this is in progress, that this is rolling along, having a finished product. I would think the unveiling of something, the ideal time to do it would be in warmer weather. So I don't know the parameters of this. I would think next spring would be the right time for a proper unveiling. I don't know if that would impact the grant, but that would be what I would ideally call for. Just two other things, very quickly. The first is about the initial grant proposal. I think the parameters are really set there for what this grant was written for, and it tells us what's eligible. I agree that it shouldn't be limited, but as long as it fits within those parameters. So not being entirely familiar with it, I don't know if that includes performance, I don't know if that includes music, but if those areas are open, those things should be eligible. But I think we're past the point of debating what falls within the realm of this proposal. And then finally, it just seems to me, not being as familiar with this, that there's been some tension about, or mistrust about, who's making decisions about what's selected. And oftentimes with grants, what different organizations will do is they'll pull in some outside people in connection with local people. So you have local people, but you also have outside experts who've been identified and have served on panels like this before, who can help guide this process. So those are things I would consider. I'm really happy we're at this point. I think it's crucial that we follow through with this, and thank you.
Thank you. What I'm going to suggest at this point, just procedurally, is that a meeting of the Town Arts Committee be called for, as soon as possible, start of next week, end of this week, start of next week anyway, and that everybody who's interested in participating and everybody who's turned out here, anybody else be invited to participate if we can get a quorum of the committee, and you can take formal action to endorse something as specific as possible, go ahead. If you don't have a quorum of that committee, then you're going to not have the authority to take action, but you can do the same work that you would be doing without having a quorum there and make a recommendation that's the collective decision-making of the group and whoever's there to provide input. And as early as that can be done, to develop an action plan considering these deadlines and considering these timelines and considering these general thoughts, to then coordinate thereafter with the planning director and the town manager with the goal of having an action plan ready for us to consider and approve. It would have to be ready by Thursday in order to go into finalized by like 10 days from now in order to go into the binder for the meeting for the 16th, because the agenda is finalized on Wednesday, and that would be the 10th. So the agenda is finalized on the 10th, and then on the 12th, the binders get assembled and get distributed to the board members and to the public. And then we'll put this back on the agenda for the 16th, I'm sorry, the 16th. And hopefully we'll be able to consider and approve the action plan. I hope we can also have on the agenda the composition and size of the Town Arts Committee, so that if we need to reduce the size of that committee in order to make sure that we have a quorum, and if there's anybody else who wants to join on, I hope they put their names in. But please feel free to go to the meeting and participate as well. So I guess that's a suggestion for how we should move forward procedurally. Anybody on the board think that's a good or a bad idea?
It's great.
It's good.
Thanks, Mr. Gittleson, for the concept of when you're going to do the, November's not the time to celebrate something.
Right, I mean, we want to hear just where we are. So I see your hand, John, but I don't think we need a vote on that. We generally agree with the proceeding that way, and we don't need formal action in order to do that. Is there any more vital business, something that we haven't heard that we need to hear on this topic at this point? Go ahead, yeah, please. Quick, because we still have an hour's worth of presentation from the planning department. I saw Sue Fillion walk in.
We're tired.
John, come on, man.
Betty Fry, Guilford. Wasn't thinking I'd come up here, but I did spend a lot of time yesterday researching this. I appreciate the town manager spending time discussing it with me. I really appreciate Son's input on talking about it, and there's material out there to research it. So who I don't see in this equation is, I see that it's supposed to be the grantor themselves, the town, but where is the Arts Council of Windham County? It's on all the documentation that they're a partner in this, the third leg, and I don't hear any mention about them participating. So that's a question.
Mr. Dimick is here. He wasn't here as a representative of the Arts Council as he was speaking, but the Arts Council is welcome to participate at the Town Arts Committee level and at the Select Board level by giving input at any point. Scott?
I don't know if the Arts Committee actually has a chairman at this point, or if people that are sitting on the Arts Committee, if their tenure or their period that is supposed to be on it may have already expired and they're actually not supposed to be on the committee anymore. Do you know anything about that? I heard that the chairman stepped down. I've been to many meetings. They can rarely get a quorum. I have a lot of doubts as to whether they can handle this in the next 2 weeks.
Well, the composition of Town Arts Committee, hold up. The composition of Town Arts Committee is not on the agenda for tonight. It's going to be on the agenda for 2 weeks from now. What we've heard tonight is that it's an 8-member committee and that there's 5 current members, and we've asked whoever is acting as chair to call a meeting that'll be publicly noticed and warned. If we have a quorum, then it'll be able to take official action. If it doesn't have a quorum, then the people who are there will be able to act as a group, but won't be able to act as a committee of the town because there won't be a quorum. And I can't do anything about that anymore until we examine its composition at the next meeting. And anybody who's got interest in participating, please put in an application. We noticed last week that there were openings on these committees. John?
Just briefly, I would encourage the clearest possible understanding of who can make decisions on the fly with respect to the fate of the grant. The Arts Committee has a clear understanding that it is an advisory body. We're being charged with doing certain things. We'll have to make certain decisions. We would love, for example, to know that we have the ongoing support of the town manager's office. We can go to them with some questions if there's a clear understanding with the select board that the manager's office can support us in that respect.
Peter?
Yeah, I can confirm that, and I think more broadly, town staff is available to the community to answer questions and provide documentation and so on. So we're happy to assist in that. I think, though, that you can expect of us and should expect of us something that is beyond just that in this intense effort we're going to undertake in this next 2 weeks. So while we always view ourselves as, important part of our role is to be available to people from the community who are interested in business of town government, at this moment, we are under the gun to come back with a very specific, viable plan 2 weeks from tonight. Actually, I have to complete that within the next 10 days in order to have it published to be able to be reviewed by the community in preparation for 2 weeks from tonight. So how staff will interact with the Arts Committee or with a subset of the Arts Committee is going to depend a lot, I think, on whether or not a quorum of the Arts Committee can rally together in very short order. If that happens, we're happy to work together with the full committee. But if that can't happen, then we will continue to work with the two people who have taken the lead, and we will rely upon them to coordinate, hopefully fully and adequately with others, to the degree that any of you don't feel that you are fully enough to your satisfaction engaged in that, you'll have to express that, and we'll try to help with that. But that's one of the things that gives us great concern. We want this to succeed, but it's got to succeed. If it is to succeed, it's got to proceed in a structured manner where people know how they can gain access to the process. I don't want to convey to you that staff can support the Arts Committee in a way that will allow the Arts Committee to accomplish something that it can't accomplish itself, I guess is how I'm trying to express that. The 5 members of the committee need to come together and function as a committee and take action on this working draft of a way forward, and staff will do anything we can to assist in that. If that doesn't work, we'll know within the next few days whether or not it's going to, then staff will do what staff does. We've got an obligation to advise the board well about how they can proceed in the direction that a majority have expressed a desire to proceed. And we want to do that in as collaborative a manner as possible. But in this particular step, if staff needs to play staff's role and provide administrative advice that isn't so collaborative, I would ask you to understand that that's intended to push forward in a positive way something that will become very collaborative as it gets executed. If we don't do this piece fast and well, there's no opportunity to do the collaboration.
And so to put it another way, in response to this question about status, and then we're going to draw this to a close, Select Board is ultimately responsible for making these decisions and acting in this area on behalf of the town. We've delegated that responsibility to town manager, who's delegating that responsibility in part to town staff. We have a committee that's providing and playing an advisory role, and we're hoping that the public good can be served through the most collaborative process possible, recognizing that 2 weeks ago the process was potentially inexorably broken, and it looks like it's in the process of getting resurrected, and we'll know 2 weeks from now if we've got something in place.
Also, in terms of participation and being able to keep track of what's going on, whatever documents are going to be considered at the meeting on the 16th will be on the town website under it's Patrick, Assistant Manager Moreland puts together the administrative reports, and you can just click on it and you'll find all the documents in there, so you can see them ahead of time and then come on Tuesday and we'll talk about it just like we did tonight.
thank you very much. We're going to draw this agenda item to a close. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We're going to take a 5-minute break for the TV and for the ASL interpreters. We'll be back on at 10 to 9 with our zoning presentation. Brattleboro Select Board meeting is reconvened after our 6-minute break. And we're here for our 4th presentation on the zoning ordinance. Mr. Francis, Ms. Fillion,
You'll get it.
Welcome back.
Ms. McLaughlin. Hi.
Hi. Good evening.
Good evening again.
You're at the table, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So tonight is the 4th in a series of presentations concerning the new land use regulations, and tonight we are going to focus our attention on design standards for the proposed land use regulations, and the goal of the session is to advance the design literacy of the built environment by looking in particular at design standards of buildings and then development standards more generally. And so to assist us in this process, we want to introduce you to some typical terms used to describe the form of a building and its orientation to the street and to other buildings. And so what we have here, let me just see if I can get my magnifying glass to work. So what we have here is a series of just a sort of a basic sketch that's showing the difference between the position of and size of buildings relative to other buildings on the street as a way of indicating the compatibility with the context, which is the neighborhood. So what we're going to talk about here is when you use the term context in this sense, we're talking about the neighborhood or the streetscape. We want to talk about the public realm, which again could be the open space around a commercial or a public building. So for instance, the area in front of the municipal center, but also that small garden area in front of Brattleboro Savings and Loan or the Merchants Bank or even Key Bank, an area where a private property owner is willing to welcome in members of the public who may find a use for that space without direct relevance to the use that they're putting the building to. Orientation, articulation, roofs in terms of their shape, whether they're pitched or not or flat, materials, building height, and building footprint. And to do this, what we're going to do here, luckily and hopefully if it works, is play a short video clip which will introduce you to these concepts. I know it's a little late for this, but the good news is
movies.
Yeah, right.
There's no music.
There's no soundtrack, so you actually have to pay attention. I'm sorry about that, and we won't dim the lights. So here we go.
We have to read.
Can you read it? We can read it.
You have to read. Yes.
Cool. She's already sleeping. I know. I feel like I'm in 6th grade again.
Did you guys make this?
No.
No, we borrowed it just for a little brief period.
This is going to be hard for the ASL people to do. You know?
They're doing great.
Where are the big trucks?
It's not Brattleboro.
I can give you a clue. It's Virginia.
Well, I recognize that as a form of zoning that you endorsed last week. Porches. Right.
Shelburne Road.
Oh, that's Putney Road, 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so
that was nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice, calming introduction. So the town plan recommended that we adopt design standards, and that was after a rigorous process of establishing what the town's assets were and what our challenges are. And this has led us through the process of developing land use regulations that address 3 major areas for all buildings that would be considered commercial. So the first area is frontage, the area between the street and the building. The second is buildings themselves, in particular the facades, what we call them massing, and fenestration, which is a really fancy word for windows, and parking, both the location and the layout of parking.
So the frontage standards, again, that's dealing with the area between the front of the building and the street, so how it engages with the public realm. And our standards basically are looking to control landscaping, pedestrian access, so making sure that there's access to a sidewalk or to the front of a building, and any commitment that might be required in the public realm. So for example, this is an illustration of good design in the urban center, which is our downtown. And so here you have a front setback that you can build right up to the property line, or you can set the building back a maximum of 20 feet. But if you're going to be back 20 feet, then we'd like to see some sort of outdoor seating or similar amenity. So you see this in a lot of the buildings downtown. There's Key Bank, Merchants Bank. You know, there's little patio or plaza areas. And so the goal in the urban center is to replicate the historic patterns that are generally multi-story buildings built to the edge of the sidewalk. There are some exceptions on this part of Main Street where it's not so close to the sidewalk. In the urban center, we'll be requiring street trees, parking. You can't create new surface parking in the urban center, but if you do have parking on the property, that can continue. We just want it behind the buildings. So that's an example of the urban center.
Question. Sure. Is the block north of Subway part of the urban center?
Yes.
Yes.
Why do we have new parking in front of Dead River?
Well, that actually went before the Development
Yes.
Review Board, and they allowed it.
Right.
Was it consistent with our zoning ordinance?
The DRB found it to be.
That wasn't my question.
We are being delicate in our answer intentionally. So staff prepared a report for the DRB arguing that it in fact was a violation.
It went before the DRB because they appealed the decision of the they
zoning.
were issued a violation.
Right.
They appealed that to the DRB.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, good. Apropos of the standard too.
I'm sorry?
I said apropos of the standards that you're talking about.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. So in all of the developed districts in the proposed land use regulations, there is some sort of frontage. So this is pretty much the area east of 91, as well as the rural business, the institutional industrial districts. They all have some sort of frontage standard. We weren't going to show you all tonight, but just kind of orient you to it so that you can take a look. But we're happy to answer any questions you might have on the other districts. Because the neighborhood center is a new district that we're proposing, we thought we would show you kind of what's going on there. So again, this has a minimum front setback of 10 feet and a maximum of 40 feet. In that initial 10 feet, that's kind of you definitely can't, we want good landscaping in there. We don't want any parking in that 10-foot area. Beyond that, you can have 1 or 2 rows of parking. You can have a little encroachment into the front setback area if you're going to have porches or something like that. We don't want visible outdoor storage. That would need to be camouflaged, and no outdoor storage or display could be in that 10-foot minimum front yard setback. And again, no parking in that 10-foot area. So definitely, I think one of the things that we're seeing with the frontage standards is an increase in landscaping.
What's an example of where that is, or where that would be?
Where the neighborhood center would be, so the Price Chopper area of Canal Street, and then also the area from Royal Plaza Shopping Center to just the north end of the Veterans Bridge.
To the, yeah, right. basically to the corner of the marina site. Right.
And this year.
These are the neighborhood center is a new zoning district that we're proposing. Let me just clarify. Are you asking for an example of where standards like this are in place now in another community, or
would apply here?
It will apply to new development.
Yes.
Yes.
Commercial areas
Yes.
on Canal Street.
Right.
And from
Right.
the Veterans Bridge
Yeah.
up
Right.
to Royal
And-
Wilson.
Yeah, it will apply to, new
Right.
commercial development and the residential commercial, so if it's over
right?
3 units.
And I can't think of an existing site or something that would illustrate it here, right now. But I mean, that doesn't mean to say I just can't think of it right now. But.
So then it is a nice improvement. It sounds like.
So the second element of our design standards is building standards. And the purpose of these is to promote high quality development. So these cover kind of the basic architectural components of a building, the facades, the roofs, windows, particularly for retail. They're pretty modest, we think, and they're explained both in text and in illustrations such as this. This is an example of the Village Center zoning district, and the standards here they address, basically we don't want blank walls. And so if you have a wall that's greater than 40 feet, you're going to have some visible change. That could mean you set something back or you have a porch, something to kind of break it up. We're looking, particularly in the Village Center, for compatible architectural form, scale, massing. So you might recall we talked about maximum building footprints in most of the districts, but this is one where we're really trying to keep the historic character. So if you're going to have a roof, it needs to be a certain pitch. We're not saying you have to have a pitched roof, but if you're going to have a pitched one, we want it to be compatible with what's out there, which is 6 to 12 or steeper. And then we want some sort of visual interest on the building as well, so you can choose between having an open porch or storefront windows if you're retail, or some sort of distinctive architectural feature, so that we don't get blank block one-story buildings. Okay, again, we're going to show you the neighborhood center because it's a new zoning district. In here, the maximum building footprint is larger. This is 12,000 square feet. Again, we don't want blank walls without anything going on. So if you have we call it a bay, but if it's a part of the building that's over 48 feet, you would need to have a visible change there to break it up so we don't have a long blank wall. If you have a blank wall, sometimes, like we were looking last night at the Planning Commission, like the marina, because it's oriented towards the river, you've kind of got all glass on the river side. The side that faces the parking lot has a blank area.
Be careful.
John screwed up.
Oh, sometimes it involves on-site decisions that are not approved by.
It's oriented towards the river, so it makes sense, and there is some landscaping in front of that blank wall. So if you've got a blank wall that's 20 feet, exceeds 20 feet, we'd want some landscaping to kind of break it up.
And an example of where we would accept some kind of explanation could include that, where the applicant is maximizing a view or some other attribute. The other one, and the constraint that applicants will encounter is meeting the energy code standards. So the more windows you have, the harder it is to achieve energy standards without making other really dramatic commitments to the building envelope. And so, for instance, if all the windows if the north wall were blank and that was viewable from the public realm, we might, there are ways we work with that around the question of them maximizing solar gain on the southern side or something similar.
What's the procedural mechanism for getting a change in the design standard based upon one of those considerations? Is it a variance? Is it
It's definitely a variance.
No, it would be a waiver.
Waiver.
I think That's one area I think we actually, based on discussion at the planning commission last night, we need to make sure it's in there clearly. Because I
The
think
waiver
it's,
language doesn't currently apply to design standards?
no,
No.
no. The other
Right now,
waivers.
there's no procedural
There's
mechanism.
right. Don't think there
So
is.
so one of the, based on conversation with the planning commission last night, we need to establish a mechanism that would allow applicants to make a case. That they're respectful of the reason why we've got design standards, but they've got a choice that doesn't meet the language.
But they do have a mechanism to.
It's going to be drafted.
Yeah, so we're going to draft it.
Not yet.
It's not yet, but no, but there.
Yes.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
It kind of, when
Right.
we've been going through and looking at buildings in town to see how they measure up, and kind of came out last night. That
We settled on the marina because it's beautifully
one of
built.
them.
Because it's beautifully built, I guess.
Nice try.
But it wouldn't have met the
I
design
didn't
standards.
It's okay.
So other things about the neighborhood center is that we'd like retail stores to have clear glass running a certain portion of it so that it looks like retail. And one of the ones that came to mind for us is a building up on Putney Road that was built for another use, but now is occupied by Sinel Auto. And it's got its back turned to Putney Road, and it's, you know, because it went commercial, it's got this kind of large sign that bans the building and stuff. And so we'd like buildings to be oriented towards the street, at least have an entrance. It doesn't have to be the only entrance, and have windows that, you know, are kind of for retail.
Can I just ask, wasn't that built for that?
No. Originally, it was built as a veterinary clinic
Yeah.
and was repurposed as an auto parts store,
Oh, that's right.
which explains the unusually small windows, which are effectively the back of the building, which is
Right.
facing Putney Road. So in recent times, part of what the impetus for these design standards are is, in very recent times, we've had projects that have confronted us with certain design choices on the part of the applicant, and we haven't had the tools to respond to it. And that would be one such example.
But it was never used as a veterinary.
No.
clinic. Okay, that's, okay.
Right.
I thought I missed something, so.
Right, no.
No.
So
And
it was
then,
built for that purpose and then.
Right.
yeah. And then finally, in this district, you could have auto-dependent uses. So drive-throughs and fuel pumps and service bays, they would need to be to the side or the rear of the building. So we don't want them in front. So that would be another kind of building and frontage kind of standard for the neighborhood center.
So before you jump to the conclusion about gas stations, the Cumberland Farms, for instance, is an example of,
Right, it's in the side.
yeah, the
Sandry as well.
yes, that's true.
It's on the side.
Right. So let me talk
They said
about
the gas pumps need to be on the side, not in the front, so
Right.
somebody said.
right. So you can use the front of you can move the front of the building as close to the street as possible to address what we would say address the street, and the service function, which is the pumps, can be behind or beside.
I don't mean to bring this up again.
That's
but
okay.
Explain to me what the problem, and I'm just using this because you guys did, what the problem was with the marina. I mean, there was a lot of glass,
Yeah.
but then the part facing the street.
Wasn't a problem at the time.
No. I'm just, no.
The driveway.
Right, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think of.
There's a lot, I don't remember what the length of it is, but there's a blank wall kind of
Right.
to the right of the entrance that's, I'm
Where the
guessing
kitchen-
longer
where the
than
kitchen-
20
where the
yeah.
kitchen is.
Right.
Yeah, so what we're saying, and there's perennials that are landscaped in front of it, but we would want a little bit more landscaping to kind of hide the blankness of the wall. Because that technically is the front of the building.
The Hannah Cosman effect? Hannah Cosman, just real quickly, wanted shrubbery on everything. She didn't care what you were putting in, she just wanted shrubbery.
We could write that in if you
And you
needed.
could write
I
that.
think it might be in there.
Okay. All right.
It probably is.
Okay. Let's see how case law deals with that.
I learned something tonight.
Okay. So there you go.
Things tonight.
All right.
There's some plants in that room.
So
Ask it.
let me move on to parking standards. And I should.
No,
Kate
Kate
has a
has a question.
Oh, okay.
No, I just was making a comment that I sort of feel like we're micromanaging, telling people they have to put flowers in front of their building.
We're not saying put flowers. We're saying landscaping. So
There's lots of options.
and the alternative there would be either to use some building technique that broke up the facade. So you wouldn't necessarily have to put windows in, but you'd have to do something to alter the
Pleasantness.
the sort of, it's just a big block.
It's like a fortress.
Right. So it's a flat plane of one color. And so, if you alter the surface in some way so that you make it you introduce more interest or variation in that facade, then you've achieved the goal. The alternative, which is actually cheaper and probably easier to do depending on the site, is to soften it with substantial landscaping in the front so that there is some engagement between the passing pedestrian or the members of the public and that part of the building. We've got some pictures. If you go back to the video, there was a very effective moment where there's a woman strolling down the street, and I think it's actually
Rite Aid or something.
a Rite Aid or something. It's just an uninterrupted wall. It's really long. And there are public safety concerns about how uncomfortable people feel doing that, and a bunch of other issues. I'm not saying that's the case with the marina, but in general terms, what we want to do is address that bland expanse of blank wall, because people find it alienating, basically, right?
And I think,
You go ahead.
I would say, the marina, just because I was looking at it yesterday, but I think probably a better example of a blank wall is the Aldi's.
Right.
And the DRB actually pushed them to change the brick pattern to at least break it up, and they were willing to do that. But, if that was closer to the street, it would feel.
And that was another example where we were really leaning on them in a very gentle way, because we didn't have any rules on the books to say you've got to meet this requirement. So they were responsive, and they were responsive as far as they could go within the limitations of their project budget and the design and the timelines that they were dealing with, and they were responsive.
But they also put parking in the front. You would want it in the back, right?
We had some back and forth about that too.
Not all of it. I mean, you are
Right.
allowed to have a row or two
Right.
in the front.
But they don't have any in the back.
They effectively have it. Well,
They have it on the side.
They have it on the side.
Oh, that counts.
So they have a challenge with 18-wheeler access, and so they have a line of parking up against the wall, the front wall, and then a drive aisle, which is the exit lane for the 18-wheelers, which circumnavigate the entire site before backing in. So there were constraints there. They also wanted to get as close to the original footprint of the theater as possible for other utility service reasons. And so, again, we didn't have anything explicit. We got them to go as far as they could go with our rules at the time. Right?
But just what I want to say is that your comment about micromanaging, while met with a very strong response from the planners, is actually well taken, because the balance that's drawn by this proposed zoning ordinance is to impose design standards that do not currently exist, with the goal of making the streetscape more attractive and more inviting, but it increases transaction costs and can be a drag on development. And that's a policy choice that is already been made to a certain extent in the town plan, because adoption of design standards was included in the town plan. But when people want to come in, you could have a developer like Aldi's look at the design standards and say, well, that's nice, but it costs too much, and so we're not going to do it. And I don't know where the balance lies, but please say those things out loud, because that's the question. Do I have that wrong?
No, and what I'd say is that it is, in fact, a policy stance that the select board has to arrive at. based on the information that you have available. I would say, somewhat in our defense, the process of the town plan was pretty rigorous and lengthy. And then the other part about this is that we are dealing with regulations currently in place that date from really the late 1970s or the early 1980s. And even large developers like all these, in particular actually, the chain store developers and so forth, while they're operating with extremely tight margins and other severe self-imposed restrictions perhaps in terms of the way they're going to achieve their project, they're not at all unfamiliar or unaware of community standards such as this. And if, by way of example, and we can get onto this maybe later with some photos, if you actually look at Cumberland Farms or even a number of other sites in town, the Walgreens comes to mind, we have an image of that. It actually achieves the sorts of things that we're asking for, and it's their template, it's their basic design template. In other words, they meet those requirements as a matter of course all across the country. So in a somewhat odd way, it's the chains that have less difficulty meeting these expectations and are much more familiar with them because they encounter them all over the country. It's the mom and pop stores or the locals who are gonna probably find the transition from today's regulations to these land use regulations more of a stretch.
And that points to the fact that Brattleboro is the one that's catching up, because the nationwide chains already expect this sort of regulation.
So just correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you will, that these are regulations, but they're also guidelines.
Yes, and what I'd say there is that it can be argued that they could add cost or, chill a development project, but in many instances, it's a set of choices, it's a menu of choices that a developer or an applicant can make at the very beginning because they can use them as guidelines and simply make design decisions at the very outset that are not an extra cost. They're just I'm going to choose from this palette or this set of items and configure the building in that way. And so by drawing more clearly the community's expectations and giving a framework, we hopefully will have applicants responsive to that, because they'll get more than is currently the case. They're going to get clear guidance on how to actually do it.
And I'm not expressing my disapproval necessarily.
No, I know.
Pointing out that this is a choice that's made, and you move towards a more livable and attractive community as a result. But this is the way it will be pitched by some of the development community.
Right, but what I was getting at is that there are also avenues for them to say, well, we really need to do it this way.
Right.
Is there some movement in your regulations?
With the waiver language will be available for them to take advantage of in that regard.
Yes.
Right. And so, are we ready to move on to parking standards?
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay, it's good. So, we have very limited regulatory control over parking as it currently stands. We have very outdated ratios for establishing the number of car parking spaces on the basis of the square footage of the building and the kind of use that it's being put to. The current land use regulations in Brattleboro are almost silent on the question of stormwater management, for instance, or landscaping, or a whole bunch of other attributes that are important aspects of parking design. And so what you see here, I should also emphasize that whenever you see these line drawings, these sketches, these are drawn from the version of the land use regulations that you have before you. And so what we've attempted to do is use sketches such as this to facilitate the applicants having every possible support for them making the appropriate decisions and the right application, rather than just lots of verbiage. The question or the issue with parking lots is that they are increasingly seen as a public safety hazard the larger they are and the less well lit they are, they become a barrier to movement of pedestrians and cyclists at different times of day, particularly women and children who may find that they contribute to a sense of risk. And there are serious stormwater and water quality issues that arise from them, and they break up the streetscape in a way that privileges vehicular movements over pedestrian and cyclist movements. And so what we're really trying to do here by introducing clear standards is respect pedestrian and cyclist use by ensuring that there are sidewalks and that there's a clear articulation between the sidewalk, the public sidewalk, and the front of the building by the implementation of walks and pathways, that a requirement that street trees be planted, that we buffer the parking area from the street with a substantial amount of landscaping, and that we limit the total amount of paving available for vehicular access in the setback. In other words, trying to ensure that the setback features as much landscaping and other development as possible. Wherever possible or wherever practical, we'd encourage shared vehicular access and interconnected parking and other matters. So this picture here is drawn from the Service Center zoning district, which is Putney Road,
And right off exit 1.
and immediately off exit 1. So between the exit 1 ramp and the edge of the Price Chopper lot, and then Putney Road north of, including Hannaford's and running north. So what we're trying to do here is to simply break up the large expanses of parking with landscaping and encourage as much shared parking as possible. I think we're also operating on the assumption that as time passes with the new land use regulations, we are not going to see continued increase in the number of vehicle trips accessing these areas. So in other words, the current parking demands are probably already a little lower than the highest point, and we do not expect them to grow on the basis of state data and other data on vehicle usage and people's travel patterns. So we're going to move on to development standards now, and Sue's going to start off with a discussion of signs.
So we have a couple of slides on parts of site plan review or site development standards. It's not all of the development standards, but it was just a couple that are commonly come up. And so again, these apply to commercial developments and residential, or how do we say that? Multifamily,
right.
I guess, residential. In terms of signs, right now we have a pretty complex sign ordinance, and it's a little all over the place. It's been streamlined nicely. We've broken it up into 4 sign zones. So the urban center, village center, and neighborhood center are one sign zone. Then the service center, rural business, and industrial are a sign zone, and that's the only zone where you could have an electronic message sign. And then there's the mixed use, water and recreation, and institutional zones, which are 3. And then the residential neighborhoods are the 4th zone. And
Hasn't
rural
signage in town been a problem for a long time? As far as size, placement, I can remember for a while there it was pretty contentious.
We have convoluted language that is in a blind test with other people's convoluted language is not much worse. So I would say that across the country and even wider than that, signs, the permitting process for signs and their enforcement is a very contentious aspect of land use development. And we are no different in that regard. Our language is clunky, involves lots of weird calculations, and is difficult to process. And therefore, I think we generate a relatively high degree of dissatisfaction with people who've never encountered it before. But again, going back to the frequent flyers, there are many sign makers in the region who are used to installing signs for chain stores and so forth, again, who don't have any real difficulty navigating our requirements, and we get relatively little pushback or challenges there. So it's one of those things where if it's the first time and the last time you're ever going to do a sign, could be a fairly steep learning curve, but and I think it's quietened down some is also.
There was a period of time.
There was.
Yeah,
Right.
years ago, for about 10, 15
Right,
years.
that's what I remember.
Right.
It was,
The size of
It was
signs.
awful.
held big.
Yeah, it really
Well,
was.
it's interesting. Yeah,
Is there a relationship there?
it's
No, it
interesting.
happened started before I got there.
The Planning Commission has discussed a little bit, and we're still working through this, but it's a bit more generous in size than currently exists in the ordinance, and so we're kind of like, well, is that a good thing, or do we not want to? We've heard some opinions keep it, especially for out on Putney Road. That would be that zone district. It would be more, would allow bigger signs both on the buildings and ground signs. And our consultant is kind of in the opinion, well, you need to see the business, and she likes to point out one of them that says she can't find it because it's so small. So we're still kind of working through that, but I would say that the sign size is more generous, especially for those commercial areas.
I think the key is, again, the character of the neighborhood. So if you're a traveler and you're in the service center, which is that area, the northern stretches of Putney Road, and you're not familiar with town, or if you're in the service center and you've immediately come off exit 1, we think it's reasonable that you've got a set of expectations from moving around the United States that you're going to encounter chain stores and gas stations. You may be looking for a recognizable sign, like a logo that you recognize or a brand that you prefer. Something like the Golden Arches or something. And so we're willing to work with that and accept that as a requirement or an expectation of the traveling public. On the other end of the spectrum, we don't want to encourage or expect to confront people imposing very large internally lit suburban style signs in the downtown or the village centers, because we've got an important asset that we want to protect there. And if you prevent people from viewing the building because it's now covered in gaudy internally lit signs, then the historic designation and our tax credit programs and a bunch of other efforts that we already have in place to protect and enhance that streetscape are for naught. The example of a new downtown building that has done a very thoughtful and tasteful job of signage is in fact the Brooks House. And so they're subtle, they're in keeping with the character of the structure. The lighting is downcast. It's a thoughtful and subtle treatment that allows the passerby to enjoy the structure without it being blocked by the signs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an illustration of how to do it in our mind.
Yeah. So all the same types of signs that are in the existing ordinance would be in the proposed as well. Wall signs, hanging signs, whatnot.
Did you have those 4 districts before, or is that something?
No, they were kind of broken. There is a section in the current ordinance that says if you're in rural residential, you can do this. If you're in the urban center, it's much.
Now you've made it more definitive.
Yeah, and it's much easier to read.
Right.
I think there's a nice checklist. You can have this sign, in this zone. So. We've already talked about parking, but again, we're trying to right-size parking, or the number of parking spaces. So we've got our parking calculations are probably from the 1980s. So it's based on use and square footage, and you arrive at a number. They're pretty generous right now. I don't think, from the calculations I've done, we're not seriously restricting, but we are putting in what's in the proposed land use regulations are the minimum required. Applicants can up to double it, but they would need to provide a parking study that shows that they have a need for that amount of parking.
Have you guys taken into consideration, because I plow, plowing is very hard when you have this kind, like, and I always use Price Chopper as an example because I don't know how they do it. I mean, with all those curb cuts in there and all the little islands, and they're constantly being wrecked. Just because there's no simple way. And I know that what you're trying to achieve, but because we live in the Northeast, some of it doesn't seem practical. And that's, I'm just getting into the...
We definitely acknowledge that's a challenge. If you look at this diagram here,
I would kill somebody if I had to plow that.
well, you can go this way, John.
Have you ever plowed?
Just enough to know. I think I only wiped out 2 cars. So I think the issue that we're trying to get at is if you do something like this one over here, people then sort of lose their composure, as it were, as users of the parking lot and start just traversing the parking lot because they want to park over here, and they drive straight through. It's risky for pedestrians, it's risky for other car users, you get speed, you get a whole bunch of other issues. All that is on display actually at the Price Chopper parking lot.
Right.
And it certainly is on display most Saturdays at Hannaford's. So what we're trying to do here is address the stormwater concerns.
Yeah.
Provide some relief to the urban heat island effect by having plantings and so forth. If done thoughtfully, the plantings can also contribute to the stormwater management issue by having root baskets and so forth so that it can transpire the surface water that's collected in the basket. There's a bunch of environmental and safety measures that we can implement through some minimal landscaping and lighting requirements. Acknowledge that at 4 a.m. when it's the 10th lot you're doing, it could present challenges. But I think that what we want to do is try and work with the experts in the field to come up with an outcome that minimizes the conflict but also achieves these standards. I think that the raised sidewalk sections in the Hannaford's lot actually are pretty useful for protecting pedestrian users, giving some shape, if you like, to the lot, and could be maybe a little more generous and include some plantings, for instance. I think that there's the parking lot at Dartmouth Hitchcock is a good example of one that it's large, it's a very large parking lot, it's massive, and they've done various treatments that have addressed some of the issues that I just outlined, as they do with the one in the plaza over the road from Dartmouth Hitchcock. So there are local examples of northeastern style parking lots that are responsive to your needs as a plow driver, but also achieve a little more control and break up the surface and provide some pedestrian, I think refuge is the word that is commonly used. Yep. So
That covers parking lots.
Yep.
We have lighting standards as well. We have them. Well, we have a kind of a short paragraph right now about lighting, requiring that it be LED and kind of downcast. Similar to the signs, our lighting standards break it into kind of 2 light zones. One is the kind of the rural and the residential, which are the lower light, and then the other, the developed commercial areas, is the other light zone. Most light fixtures are going to have to be shielded in some way, partial or full shielded. Most lights would have to be turned off after 10. Obviously, businesses that stay open, they're not going to turn their lights off. There's special standards for certain uses, such as gas stations and auto sales lots. So it's definitely more prescriptive than what we have now, but again, there's kind of no teeth in the regulations we have now. And this is just an example of how canopy lighting can. We do have special standards for gas station canopy lighting, and the not that side of it is kind of typical, where lights hang down and they cause a lot of glare. the other one is probably a lower level, but you can still see it's well illuminated.
So the key difference here is that these are basically bolted on to the panel, and so there's a side profile to the light fitting as well as the facing directly down, so parallel to the ground. Whereas these are recessed, so the light leakage to the side is totally controlled, and so it's only really going where they intended the light to go. It's not polluting off outside the canopy area.
And the standards are compatible with kind of the dark skies initiatives. So.
Right. Which there's a lot of enthusiasm and support for in Vermont in general, and Brattleboro in particular. The last thing is, again, thinking of a chain, like a gas station chain or so forth. They hire specialists who basically retail or wholesale the lighting fixtures to them, who provide the photometric studies and know exactly which fixtures to put in which locations to achieve the desired result. It's a highly technical, specialized field with it's an industry in its own right. And so for the most part, in the areas that we're requiring this kind of design, we expect this to fit within the typical development application procedures for the applicants. Okay, so let's turn our attention to landscaping. You might recognize this. It's a slightly odd angle, but this is the Walgreens. As time goes by, the trees in the parking lot are growing and improving and providing shade and breaking up the area a little more with a little bit. It's making it's less barren and harsh as an environment. The plantings immediately beyond the sidewalk are a little. They take a hit every winter and take a while to recover. But here, what you see is the building itself is located fairly close to the frontage. They're using Canal Street as frontage, not Fairground. So effectively, the parking is on the side, and there is a substantial commitment to landscaping. It could be contrasted with this site, which lacks those things, and is also
has been redeveloped.
Has been redeveloped recently, and no longer looks quite like this. But this is a shot from Putney Road, right? And so this was probably permitted in the probably the early '80s, I would say, as the original. It was a tire shop and a muffler shop before that, I think. And so, what can I say? What we're really doing is requiring applicants to install vegetative buffers between adjacent properties, require that there be green space and landscape areas related to stormwater management, and require a minimum of green space in most districts between 10 and 20 feet deep along the front of the lot. So. Now we're going to turn our attention to redevelopment.
Yeah, the last two slides are about redevelopment. So obviously, an existing commercial site is somewhat grandfathered, but what we want to try to do is over time, as properties are redeveloped, that they come into compliance the best that they can. And so we've written guidance as to kind of what can be achieved. So we didn't talk about access and circulation, but obviously if you can bring it more into conformance, given the physical characteristics, we'd like that to try to be achieved in redevelopment. Parking and loading, again, to the extent feasible, the priority would be to eliminate parking in the front setback. So Hannaford's or Price Chopper, it's clearly not going to be possible if they're making some minor site changes to, take down the buildings and bring them up to the road. And so obviously that wouldn't happen in something like that. But, on a smaller site where they're making some site plan changes, they're redeveloping, maybe you can pull the parking out of that front setback and rearrange it on the site. Lighting, if you're redeveloping a property, then the lighting is going to need to come into compliance. That was one where and that it's pretty typical that we see the lighting get changed easier than the other ones. It's not as expensive to do, I think. Signs, if you are changing the content, the primary content of the sign, or making some sort of exterior modification to the sign, then that would need to be brought into compliance as well. And then stormwater. Stormwater is the one development standard, I think we talked about it at one of the other meetings, that would apply to 1 and 2 family residential properties. So if you're adding an accessory structure or some sort of minor change to it, then you wouldn't need to bring into conformance. But if you're doing some sort of major project on a 1 or 2 family, you would need to come into compliance with the stormwater. And kind of same with commercial properties. And it was interesting, Rod and I were at a workshop last week, and I think with the state's clean water, the Lake Champlain stuff, they're actually going to be moving to, it's a ways out, but basically getting commercial properties over a certain size to actually come into conformance as well. So it's definitely the direction for stormwater.
So yeah, up until now, the attitude has been that as long as you don't redevelop a site, whatever your existing stormwater management that was permitted previously is okay. But they're actually moving, I think they're proposing moving towards an expiration date, effectively, on existing stormwater permits. So again, it's an example of, it's a dramatic shift on some level for us to go down this road, but the impetus for doing it is coming from the direction of both federal and state regulation. And we feel that we're not that far in front of that train, and it's possibly better coming from us and us being consistent with those expectations than it is coming from them. And so that's the purpose behind this.
And I would say, especially with the stormwater, the DRB has, on case-by-case situations, been able to get some improvements to stormwater, but it's not, there's no real teeth in the regulations right now, so this will help require it.
So we're happy to entertain questions or comments or help you out anyway.
I think we'll notice that we had asked for a presentation about the zoning ordinance, and this is the natural conclusion at this point of the presentations that the planning department was going to make to us. I communicated to Rod and to Peter, saying that one last thing that I think is really important for us to have in hand before we go to the final public hearings is to make sure that we have a solid understanding of the uses that are allowed in the various districts. Because that's really a core sort of regulatory issue. There's how many districts are there going to be going forward? Was it 9 or 14?
I think it's 9.
9.
9. And it's very difficult to decipher, looking at the charts, just what is allowed where. And so I asked Rod to try to figure out what's a good way to do another presentation like this to explain in the districts what are you allowed to do. And that would then be the last presentation we'll get. And then procedurally, I think we go to the public hearing stage. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, actually, this is a good point to check in. So first of all, there's 12 zoning districts,
12,
but it's a major reduction from what we currently have. And then we've got 2 schedules that we're contemplating here to some extent. One's nested inside the other. So the Planning Commission needs to move forward to the point where it holds public hearings, and we're proposing to hold 2. And then the question of how many public hearings the select board holds and when you hold them needs to be resolved, but it doesn't have to be answered tonight. And then, so for us, this request of tables, sort of summary tables showing permitted and conditional uses in each district, that presentation on that, we can schedule. I think we're eager for other reasons, not the least of which is your schedule, to try and still meet a September deadline for adoption. And so that's all.
I would just add, I think in the version that you got tonight, I think you will find it easier to tell the uses because they are broken out. We got rid of that big long table, and so with each zoning district there's a table. So because we found it difficult as well.
Right, well, I couldn't get through it. So,
Yeah.
but meanwhile, I
Right.
think another presentation, just to go through that,
Just
in narrative form would
Yeah,
be helpful.
okay. And to be clear, David, are you looking for a comparison between what's permitted and conditional now versus the proposed, or just a summary of the
I
proposed?
don't need that ticked off in a way comprehensive manner.
Okay.
But if there are real significant changes
Right.
for any given district,
Right.
it'd be nice to know.
Right. I think the changes are pretty subtle for the most part.
But I think we'd like to just be able to know what's
Yep.
conditional and what's
Okay.
permitted and what's prohibited in various districts, and if there's changes, what are they? So can you then tell us how many public hearings does the board need to have before, the select board need to have before
Under
adoption?
statute, you need just
I believe it's just
one
on a bylaw.
but because it's a bylaw that you're adopting. But we would probably also caution you against just one.
Oh, yeah, we're not gonna have this one.
Right.
So,
Do they stagger with the planning commission, or are you gonna have to do the two planning commission ones first?
Yes.
Yes.
Present it to us in
Our
two or
yes,
three?
because
Yep.
what the planning commission is going to need to do is provide you with a draft that reflects the planning commission's own work at the public hearing phase. So between now and the beginning of August, we propose 2 planning commission public hearings. And there could be, on the basis of what we hear from the public in that formal setting, that the planning commission would make some amendments to the text. And so then the planning commission approves a version of the land use regulations and passes it along to the select board. And then at that point, you would hold the number of public hearings that you feel it justifies. And then at the end of that, close the public hearing and vote to adopt it.
You don't need further action from us right now in that regard?
I don't believe so. I just wanted to make you aware of the calendar in broad terms.
Well, I think that we're hoping to have this last presentation, but not next week. We're looking to take a week off. And then maybe the 23rd, we can do this last presentation, unless we can do it. It sounds like the meeting on the 16th is going to be long when I see you. And then you'll propose a schedule to us.
I think the 23rd works fine for us. So that's June 23rd, yeah?
Well, Kate can't be here. Sometime during that week, we'll try to work something out. And then, John?
so the only question I have again, we have 12 districts,
Yes.
Yes.
right? So, but there is still recourse. I mean, these are, I know that they're regulations, and again, I try to keep emphasizing guidelines, that there is recourse for applicants to have something changed. I mean, it's just like going before the DRB. Am I correct on that?
No.
It depends on what you're looking, uses you
Right.
can't change.
Uses you can't change.
No, in order to get it changed, you'd actually have to amend the
Right,
zoning,
right.
the entire,
Right.
yeah.
So the process that we're in now is the policy setting process, and that is formulating new land use regulations. I think when you're talking about, what is the applicant to do, depending on what kind of application it is, they have recourse to, they can request a waiver.
Right.
They can appeal a decision. There's all sorts of legal and, strategic decisions that an applicant can make. But the process that we're engaged in right now is to set up the framework.
The framework for it.
And
Right.
once it's adopted, then it becomes town policy.
Right.
And that's, that's the way it plays. So,
And I would say about the uses, that comes from the state. I mean, we are only authorized to do in bylaws what is in state statute.
Right.
Vermont does not allow use variances. Other states do, but we don't. So
Right.
our hands are tied on that.
it's a major constraint for us. I mean, I would say, if you went 20 miles in either direction, you get that flexibility. I mean, there's trade-offs. There's other limitations that those
That's right.
states impose through their statute, but that's set for us.
Okay.
And that's why I wanted to see the use
Exactly, the use
charts
of-
per districts,
right.
because once that's set, you can't make
Right.
those uses in those districts.
Yep.
Right.
Other questions? I know it's getting very late. Anything else to be dealt with now, Adam?
To the uses, I think that.
You might want to use the microphone.
Adam Hubbard. Just to the use point, I think expanding the use of conditional uses in the chart would give you much more flexibility. That sort of gives you that room to move. In terms of the public hearing process, I encourage you to work on this and study this and come up with a public hearing process that really allows people to get their head around this. I've been studying this for about 4 months and following along pretty closely, and I can tell you with certainty that this does not make the zoning process clearer or simpler as intended. This being the final of the 4, I guess there'll be a 5th process here, but these land use regulations are, in fact, 4 different planning theories jammed into one. Form-based code, which you saw at the beginning, is definitively intended to be a zoning code on its own. It is not intended to be combined with design guidelines, dwelling unit densities, floor area ratios, heavy prescriptive dimensional requirements. These are multiple planning tools that are very sophisticated, and there's been a lot of work and a lot of effort gone into this. And what is really lacking, desperately lacking at this point, is a proper vetting of what this is like in implementation. This has to be tested on parcels. You need to see examples of what this is going to look like, because I'm in this field, I practice this on a weekly or even daily basis, and I have current clients looking at parcels that are going to walk away from a place like Whitney Place up on Upper Dummerston Road, or Delta Business Campus would not be possible under this new guideline, under this new land use regulation. That it goes outward. You know, this is highly, highly complicated, and those in my field in this town are looking at this regulation with horror into what it means. I mean, it's going to mean a lot of business if anybody will actually follow through, but it is very, very difficult to digest what is going on here. I've been and I've seen and I've followed along every step of the way, and I'm struggling to make sense of this. And if you have me that's following along every step of the way, struggling to make sense of this, I can guarantee you that the average citizen is not up to speed. And with 2 public hearings or 3 public hearings with these nice slideshows, it'll sail right through. It's well intended, it's polished, it looks right. Those architectural renderings are perfect. I like them. We're all in agreement of what we'd like to see the outcome here. The implementation is very, very difficult, very costly, and very onerous on landowners. This has a high potential to do damage to our grand list, our economy, and our development pattern that we see. I really urge you to take the time to get your head around what's in that document. And I'm sorry for taking up time at the end of a long, long meeting. I appreciate listening, but I'm available. I'd like to meet with anybody who would like to know more about it. I can tell you my interpretation. I can go through the examples that I've been through. I've made myself available, but just be careful with this document. There's a lot in there, and there's not another regulation like this in the state. And the ones that I've seen that are the most onerous in Keene and Northampton don't come close to what this land use regulation is implementing.
Well, I think that's why our meetings, our next set of meetings are going to be very.
You got to
It's gonna be very long.
other than us. So
Right.
we're not hearing anything yet.
Yeah, I mean, these guys have been open and have a nice process out in front of them, and it's a difficult task because it's complicated, and the citizens aren't participating, and this is a setup for just like pay as you throw. You go through with it, and then people get upset at the end, and this is a setup beyond setups. I mean, this is really intense for me, and I have my head around it, and it affects me daily.
Dora?
Dora Bubelis, Brattleboro. So just a couple of things, just because I may not make it to any of the meetings, the hearings, and so I'm just thinking about some of the things. thing about the blank walls, I don't have the zoning in front of me, so I can't see whether or not that language is in there, but if we can make sure that the art and living walls are included as things that can be done to break up that wall. I mean, particularly, living walls are like, that's the newest thing, and very energy efficient, and it would actually give people the freedom of creating, of having a better footprint because they wouldn't have to put in landscaping. And then the issue of lighting, I know I talked a lot about lighting when this came before the select board with the town plan. A lot of cities, actually, and a lot of communities are going toward going dark at night during migratory seasons, and I'd like to see us look at that, because I think that's sort of where people are moving toward. I think the lighting in town is horrendous, and it's not just the street lights. We're just excessively bright everywhere, and it's shining in the sky, and it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and I'd like to see us create some good standards.
Thank you, Dora. What Adam presented is what I've been warning was coming.
Oh, I know it's coming.
It's, sort of unfortunate that it's happening for the first time so late in our public meetings, because we've had a whole bunch of them now. This is 4, and we had one before, so it's now 5 meetings we've had on zoning, and nobody has said this before to us, and there's been very little specifics for us to
But we knew it was coming.
We knew it was
Yes,
coming.
we knew it was coming.
But this is the policy choice that ultimately needs to be made, and it's on us to do it, but it's very difficult without other input, really, to address it. So we will look at this going forward. We'll look forward to having another presentation about the uses in the various districts. And I see your hand, but it's 10 o'clock and we're closing up shop at this point. So, and is there anything else to come before the meeting? Thank you so much for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Anything else to come before the meeting?
Nope.
We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion to adjourn. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, abstaining, that carries 4-0. I want to thank the press. I want to thank BCTV. I want to thank everybody who stayed so late to get all this work done. I want to thank our ASL interpreters. And thanks everybody who's been watching or will be watching. Good night.